Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The headlights swallowed him whole. That's the only way I can describe it now, 3 weeks later, sitting in my apartment with every light on and the shades drawn. Not that he was hit. There was no impact, no screech of brakes, no body tumbling across the hood. The 119 bus simply crossed the intersection at Bergen Avenue like it did every Tuesday evening, its diesel engine rumbling through the damp October air. And for one impossible moment, the man running across the street existed inside the beam itself. A shadow suspended in light, flat and dimensionless, like an insect preserved in amber. I'd stopped at the crosswalk on my way back from the office in Jersey City, waiting for the signal to change. The street was nearly empty. That dead hour between the evening commute and the dinner rush when the city seems to hold its breath. The traffic light cast everything in alternating shades of red and green, painting the wet asphalt in colors that looked borrowed from somewhere else. I remember the smell of rain on concrete, the way the gutters gurgled with runoff from an earlier shower, the distant sound of a siren that never seemed to get closer or fade away. Then he appeared. No warning, no sound of footsteps, just suddenly there, sprinting from between two parked cars on the opposite side of the street. I barely registered him. Dark clothes, medium build, moving with the desperate urgency of someone late for something important. My brain was already processing the trajectory, calculating the intersection point with the approaching bus, preparing for the sickening crunch that would follow. But it didn't come. Instead, as the headlights reached him, his form seemed to flatten. Not fall, not dive out of the way, but compress into 2 dimensions, becoming a silhouette projected onto nothing. For perhaps half a second, though time felt elastic and strange in that moment, he was part of the light itself, a shape cut from illumination, moving within the beam like a figure in an old film strip. Then the bus was past, its taillights bleeding red into the darkness, and the street was empty again. I stood there, hand still raised halfway to my face in an aborted gesture of horror, staring at the vacant intersection. The crossing signal blinked its white walking figure at me, insistent. I didn't move, couldn't move. My reflection gazed back at me from the darkened window of a shuttered bakery, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, frozen in the moment before catastrophe. But there had been no catastrophe. I waited for someone else to react. A shout, running footsteps, the squeal of brakes. The street remained quiet except for the gurgle of water in the drains and that distant siren that still went nowhere. Eventually, I crossed the intersection, walking slowly, examining the asphalt for signs of what I'd witnessed. The pavement was slick with rain, reflecting the streetlights in fractured patterns. Nothing seemed disturbed. At home, I poured myself a drink I didn't finish and tried to convince myself I'd experienced a trick of the light. Perspective, fatigue, the play of headlights through rain-misted air. All perfectly rational explanations for an optical illusion. By the time I went to bed, I'd almost managed it. The footprints appeared 4 days later. I'd taken to walking different routes home, though I couldn't have explained why. Some instinct made me avoid Bergen Avenue, even if it meant an extra 10 minutes through less familiar neighborhoods. But that Saturday, running errands, I found myself approaching the same intersection from a different angle, coming down Kennedy Boulevard instead. The rain had stopped 2 days prior, leaving the city locked in that peculiar late autumn clarity where everything seemed simultaneously sharper and more distant. I was thinking about groceries, about whether I had enough coffee for the week, mundane thoughts that evaporated the moment I saw them. Shoe prints, sneaker treads, size 10 or 11, impressed into a thin layer of dried mud that the street sweepers had missed. But it wasn't their presence that froze me in place. It was their trajectory. They began in the middle of the street, not at the curb, not emerging from between parked cars, but materializing in the center of the southbound lane, as if someone had simply started existing there mid-stride. The prints crossed the remainder of the street at an angle, headed for the same curb where I'd been standing that Tuesday evening. I followed them, my pulse loud in my ears, counting each impression. 15 steps, each one clear and deliberate, the pressure pattern suggesting a running gait. Then, at the curb, they stopped. Not gradually fading or becoming indistinct, they simply ended at the edge of the sidewalk, the final print showing the ball of the foot and toes as if captured mid-step. There should have been more. The momentum implied by the spacing and depth of the prints demanded more. But the sidewalk beyond was clean, unmarked except for the usual urban detritus of cigarette butts and gum. I crouched beside that final print, aware of how I must look to anyone passing by. A man in a coat hunched over a curb, staring at nothing. My hand hovered above the impression, not quite touching. The edges were crisp, undisturbed by subsequent rain or foot traffic, fresh or preserved somehow. The pattern of the tread was distinctive, a crosshatch design with a small circular logo I didn't recognize. That's when I noticed the smell, faint but distinct, like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with something else I couldn't identify, something organic and wrong. It seemed to emanate from the footprint itself, though that was impossible. I pulled my hand back quickly, a visceral revulsion overriding curiosity. I took photos with my phone, not sure what I planned to do with them. The images came out strangely overexposed, the prints barely visible despite the clear autumn light. I tried adjusting the settings, moving to different angles, but each photo emerged bleached and indistinct, as if the camera refused to properly register what I was seeing. Walking home, I became aware of a sensation I couldn't shake, the feeling of being watched. Not from any specific direction, but from somewhere behind the surface of things, as if the city itself had developed eyes. Every reflective surface seemed to hold my image a fraction too long. Every shadow appeared slightly darker than the light around it warranted. The dream started that night, always the same. I'm standing at the crosswalk watching the bus approach. But in the dream, I'm the one running, sprinting across the street in a panic I don't understand, driven by a terror that has no source. The headlights catch me, and instead of pain or impact, there's a sensation of being flattened, compressed, spread impossibly thin. I become aware that I exist in only 2 dimensions now. That depth has been removed from my being like a mathematical operation. I'm still moving, still running, but I'm trapped inside the light itself, unable to escape its boundaries. When the bus passes, I continue in the darkness, but I'm not whole anymore. Part of me is still there, suspended in that beam, living through that moment forever. I wake from these dreams not with the usual jolt of awareness, but gradually, uncertain for several minutes whether I've actually opened my eyes or simply dreamed that I have. The darkness of my bedroom seems textured differently, as if it possesses a subtle topology I never noticed before. During the day, I began researching missing persons in Jersey City, traffic accidents on Bergen Avenue, anything that might provide context for what I'd witnessed. The public records revealed nothing unusual, the standard urban litany of minor collisions, property damage, the occasional injury, but nothing that matched my experience. No pedestrians struck by buses. No unexplained disappearances on that specific block. I expanded my search, diving into local forums and neighborhood social media groups, looking for anyone else who might have seen something strange. The posts I found were typical urban anxiety, strange sounds at night, suspicious individuals, the usual catalog of city-dwelling paranoia. Nothing supernatural, nothing that validated what I'd seen. Yet I kept searching, driven by a compulsion I didn't fully understand. The internet at 3 a.m. takes on a different character, the familiar websites casting longer shadows. I found myself following links to increasingly obscure sites, reading accounts of phenomena that shared only the barest similarity to my experience. Phantom hitchhikers, time slips, residual hauntings. The terminology varied, but the underlying theme remained consistent. Moments when reality developed seams, when the ordinary world revealed itself to be a thinner construction than we pretended. One forum post, buried in a thread from 6 years ago, made me stop scrolling. A username I didn't recognize described seeing someone flatten into the streetlight on their evening commute. The location wasn't specified, the details were vague, and the responses were dismissive. Jokes about checking their prescription, suggestions to lay off the weed. The user never posted again. I copied the text into a document, saved it, and stared at those words until they stopped making sense. Flatten into the streetlight. Not into headlights, but streetlight. Different, but similar enough to make my skin prickle. I tried to respond to the thread, but the forum had been archived years ago. The digital conversation frozen in time like those footprints frozen in dried mud. The following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after my discovery of the prints, I returned to the intersection. I told myself I was simply walking home via my usual route, that I'd been avoiding it for no good reason, that it was time to stop being ridiculous. But I knew I was lying to myself. I needed to see it again, to stand in that exact spot and confirm that the world still operated according to familiar rules. The intersection looked ordinary in the early evening light. Rush hour traffic moved through it in its usual patterns, oblivious to anything unusual. I positioned myself at the same crosswalk, watching the 119 bus approach from the same direction. It passed through the intersection without incident, its headlights illuminating nothing but empty asphalt and the usual urban debris. I waited for the next bus, and the next. Each time, the same mundane reality. Vehicles passing through space, light behaving as light should, the world maintaining its reliable solidity. After the fifth bus, I started to relax. Whatever I'd witnessed had been an anomaly, a one-time glitch in perception that wouldn't repeat. The footprints were probably unrelated, just an odd coincidence that my stressed mind had connected to an unconnected event. I was constructing patterns from chaos, seeing significance in randomness. Then I looked down and saw my own reflection in a puddle I hadn't noticed before. The water was perfectly still despite the passing traffic, its surface mirror smooth. And in that reflection, I saw something that made my breath catch. Behind my reflected form, a figure stood at the opposite curb. Dark clothes, medium build, utterly motionless. I spun around, but the curb was empty. When I looked back at the puddle, the reflection remained. The figure still there, watching me with an attention that felt heavy and wrong. I stepped back from the puddle, my heart hammering. The reflection should have changed with my movement, but it didn't. The figure remained in the same position, and now I could see more details. The posture suggested waiting, but waiting with a terrible patience, the kind of stillness that implied the ability to stand there for hours, days, years. The face was turned in my direction, but the features were indistinct, as if I was seeing them through frosted glass. A truck rumbled past, its wake sending ripples across the puddle's surface, and when the water settled, the reflection showed only empty street. I didn't wait for the light to change. I crossed against the signal, ignoring the honk of a taxi, and hurried home with my hands shoved deep in my pockets and my shoulders hunched against a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn off the lights. I sat in my living room with a book I didn't read, hyper-aware of every sound the building made, the creak of settling floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of traffic from the street below. Normal sounds that now seemed weighted with potential meaning. Around 2 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. They approached my door with measured regularity, neither hurrying nor slowing, and then stopped. I held my breath, waiting for a knock that never came. After several minutes of silence, I crept to the peephole and looked out into the empty corridor. The hallway was deserted, but there was something off about the way the overhead lights were behaving. They seemed dimmer than usual, their glow somehow thicker, as if the air itself had become a medium that light had to struggle through. And at the far end of the corridor, where the hallway turned toward the stairwell, I thought I saw movement. A shadow that didn't correspond to any object, shifting against the wall with a liquid quality that made my stomach turn. I stepped back from the door and checked the locks. Both were engaged. The deadbolt was thrown. The chain was in place. But none of these precautions made me feel any safer. Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and troubled. I dreamed I was looking at my apartment from outside, floating somehow at window level, watching myself move from room to room. In the dream, I noticed something I couldn't see from inside. My shadow was wrong. It moved independently, lagging behind my movements by a fraction of a second, sometimes taking different paths across the floor. And occasionally, when I stood still, it continued moving on its own, exploring the corners of rooms, reaching toward dark spaces. I woke to find it was Thursday afternoon. I'd apparently slept through my alarm, through multiple calls from work, through the entire morning. 12 hours of unconsciousness that left no memory beyond those unsettling dreams. My phone showed 17 missed calls and a growing string of increasingly concerned text messages from my supervisor. I called in sick, claimed food poisoning, and spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I was still in control of my faculties. The rational explanations I'd constructed earlier were beginning to feel like flimsy structures, unable to bear the weight of accumulating strangeness. That evening, I found myself drawn back to the intersection. I didn't plan to go, didn't consciously decide to leave my apartment, but at some point I realized I was already halfway there, my feet carrying me along familiar streets with an autopilot certainty that felt disconnected from my will. The footprints were still there. If anything, they looked fresher than they had days ago, as if time was moving backward for them while the rest of the world aged forward. I knelt beside them again, studying the treads with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. The circular logo in the heel. I could see it more clearly now. Not a brand I recognized, but something custom, personal. An initial, maybe, or a symbol whose meaning I couldn't decipher. As I examined them, that ozone smell returned, stronger than before. And underneath it, that other scent I still couldn't identify. Organic, yes, but not anything from the normal catalog of urban smells. It reminded me of something, triggered an association my conscious mind couldn't quite access. I was so focused on the prints that I almost didn't notice the bus approaching. The 119 running its eternal route, its headlights cutting through the deepening dusk. Some instinct made me look up, made me turn toward the intersection. And there he was again. The same figure, emerging from the same space between parked cars, running with the same desperate urgency. Time seemed to slow and thicken around me as I watched him sprint toward his impossible intersection with the bus. I wanted to shout, to warn him, but my throat had closed around the words. The headlights caught him at the same point they had before. I watched, unable to look away, as his form underwent that terrible transformation. 3 dimensions collapsing into 2, depth extracted like a pulled thread, his entire being flattening into a shadow cast by light instead of blocked by it. He continued moving within the beam, a silhouette in motion, trapped in illumination. But this time, as the bus passed, I saw something else. For just a moment, as the beam swept across my position, I saw other figures suspended there with him. Dozens of them, maybe more, all frozen in various postures of running, walking, standing. A gallery of shadows preserved in light, existing in that impossible space between source and surface. And one of them looked familiar. The posture, the build, the way the head was turned. The bus completed its passage, and darkness reclaimed the street. I stood at the curb, my hands trembling, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The runner had vanished again, leaving no trace except those impossible footprints that led halfway across the street. I looked down at my own feet, at the place where I was standing. The prints beneath me were fresh. Size 10. A crosshatch pattern with a small circular logo. My reflection stared back at me from the bakery window, but it was standing in the street, not on the sidewalk. And behind it, the headlights of an approaching bus were beginning to glow brighter. I'm writing this now because I need to record what I've understood, even though understanding hasn't brought any comfort. The footprints don't end at the curb because the crossing was never completed. They begin in the middle of the street because that's where the crossing started, where the light caught and held and preserved. They're not a record of someone who ran across Bergen Avenue. They're a record of someone who's still running. And tomorrow, when I leave for work, I'll have to cross that intersection again. I'll have to stand at that curb and wait for the signal to change. I'll have to watch the buses pass and wonder if each beam of light carries a gallery of the caught, the compressed, the ones who exist now in only 2 dimensions. I'll wonder if I'm looking at them, or if they're looking back. And I'll wonder, as I've been wondering for the past 3 weeks, whether that moment at the crosswalk was when I witnessed something impossible, or when I became something impossible. Whether I'm remembering or experiencing, whether the dreams are memories or prophecies, whether the figure I keep seeing in reflections is stalking me, or whether I'm stalking myself from inside the light I can't escape. The footprints lead to the curb but never reach it. They begin in the center of the street but never leave it. And tonight, as I sit here with every light burning, I'm starting to understand that both of those statements might be true at the same time. That I might be here, typing these words in my apartment, while simultaneously being there, suspended in the beam, running forever through a moment that never ends. The crossing signal is blinking at me from across the street. It's been blinking for 3 weeks, or maybe just for this instant that stretches toward infinity. I think I'm going to cross now. I've been crossing this whole time. I'm still crossing. Story 2. The cold spot appears every night at exactly 9:47 p.m. I know because I've timed it. 3 weeks of walking past that corner on my way to the laundry room. 3 weeks of feeling the temperature drop 15 degrees in the span of 2 feet. The fluorescent lights overhead buzz and flicker, but they never quite reach the floor in that particular spot. There's a shadow there that doesn't match any object, doesn't correspond to any logical source. It just exists, pooling in the corner like spilled ink. The building manager says it's the ventilation system, cold air from the basement units getting pushed up through gaps in the foundation. He said this while standing in the well-lit lobby, hands in his pockets, not meeting my eyes. He didn't offer to come down and look at it himself. I should have moved my laundry routine to daytime, should have used the laundromat 3 blocks away, should have done a lot of things differently, but routine is a powerful thing. Inertia even more so. It was a Thursday when I first saw it. Her. It. Whatever. I'd been carrying my basket of darks down the corridor, the weight of damp fabric making my shoulders ache. The hallway stretches about 40 feet from the elevator to the laundry room door, and the cold spot sits right in the middle. I'd learned to walk quickly through it, holding my breath like a kid passing a graveyard. That night, I looked up. Half a body stood in the doorway of the laundry room. Just half. From the waist up, pressed against the doorframe, head tilted at an angle that made my stomach clench. Long hair hung down, plastered to a face I couldn't quite see, strands clinging to skin the color of old newspaper. The hair looked wet, heavy with moisture that should have been dripping but wasn't. Everything about the posture suggested waiting. Patient, endless waiting. The basket slipped from my hands. Clean clothes tumbled across the stained carpet. I blinked and the doorway was empty. My heart hammered against my ribs as I gathered up my scattered laundry, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the fabric. The cold spot seemed to pulse, to breathe, the temperature dropping further until I could see my breath misting in the air. The fluorescent lights flickered 3 times in quick succession, and in those gaps of darkness, I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision. I left half my laundry on the floor and went back upstairs. The marks appeared that night. I stood under the shower spray, letting scalding water pound against my neck and shoulders, trying to wash away the image of that figure in the doorway. Tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, stress from work, the kind of visual trick your mind plays when you're running on 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee. Then my forearm began to burn. Not the gentle warmth of hot water, but a sharp, focused pain that felt like something dragging beneath my skin. I watched, transfixed and horrified, as 3 parallel lines rose from the flesh of my inner forearm. Red welts that seemed to push up from underneath, like something inside was trying to mark me, to claim me. The lines were perfectly straight, perfectly parallel, each one exactly 2 inches long. I scrubbed at them, but the marks didn't fade. If anything, they grew brighter under my attention, angrier. The burning sensation spread up my arm, into my shoulder, creeping toward my chest with the patient inevitability of poison in the bloodstream. I got out of the shower and wrapped my arm in a towel, hands trembling. In the mirror, my face looked pale, eyes too wide. Behind me, the bathroom door stood open about 6 inches. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I slept with every light in my apartment burning that night. The dryer started 2 days later. I'd avoided the laundry room entirely, wearing the same 3 shirts in rotation, convinced I could outlast whatever was happening, convinced it would fade if I just stopped paying attention to it. But Sunday night, I woke to a sound that pulled me from uneasy sleep. The distant rumble of a dryer drum spinning in the basement. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to that rhythmic tumbling sound drift up through the floors. It ran for exactly 15 seconds, then stopped. Silence stretched out. I was just convincing myself I'd imagined it when it started again. Another 15 seconds. Stop. Start. Each time I walked to the bathroom, the sound began. Each time I approached my front door, it started spinning. When I stood perfectly still, it went quiet. It was responding to me. The marks on my arm had faded to a dull brown, but I could still feel them. A constant low-grade burning, like a brand that never quite healed. I found myself scratching at them unconsciously, nails dragging across the skin until thin lines of blood appeared. I called in sick to work on Monday, spent the day researching the building's history on my laptop, sitting at my kitchen table with all the curtains drawn. The apartment complex was built in 1987. Nothing remarkable about the location. No murders, no tragic accidents, no buried cemetery underneath. Just a standard residential building with beige walls and mediocre water pressure. But I found a forum post from 3 years ago, buried 6 pages deep in a local community board. Someone asking if anyone else in the Riverside apartments had experienced unusual phenomena near the laundry facilities. The thread had 4 replies, all dismissive. The original poster never responded again. I tried to find them, but the account was deleted. On Tuesday night, I forced myself to go down there. Not to do laundry. I'd started hand-washing my clothes in the sink, hanging them from the shower rod to dry. But I needed to see. Needed to confirm that there was nothing, that my mind was simply unraveling from stress and isolation and too many late nights spent researching the building's past. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. The numbers above the door counted down with agonizing slowness. 7, 6, 5, 4. The basement level indicator blinked once before the doors shuttered open. The hallway stretched before me, fluorescent lights casting their sickly glow across worn carpet. The cold spot waited in the middle, that pool of shadow that never moved, never changed. And beyond it, the laundry room door stood open. I hadn't left it open. My footsteps sounded too loud in the empty corridor. Each breath came shallow and quick. The temperature dropped as I approached the cold spot, my skin prickling with more than just the chill. The air felt thicker there, resistant, like walking through invisible curtains of something that didn't want me to pass. The marks on my arm began to burn again. I stopped at the edge of the shadow, heart pounding so hard I could hear blood rushing in my ears. The laundry room door hung open about 2 feet, revealing nothing but darkness inside. The lights should have been on. They were on a sensor, triggered by movement. But the room beyond was completely black. I reached for my phone to use the flashlight, fingers fumbling in my pocket. The moment my hand closed around it, the dryer started. Not the gentle tumble of clothes being dried. This was violent, aggressive. The drum spinning so fast the whole machine shook. Metal shrieked against metal. Something inside was tumbling with a wet, heavy sound, like soaked fabric being thrashed against the sides. I didn't remember loading the dryer. I didn't remember even having laundry down here. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. In the moment I bent to retrieve it, I felt it. A presence behind me. Close. The kind of proximity that makes every animal instinct scream danger. I could feel heat at the back of my neck, feel the faint movement of air that suggested breathing. But when I spun around, the hallway was empty. Just me and that cold spot, and the sound of the dryer screaming in the darkness. I ran, I didn't go back to my apartment that night. Couldn't. The thought of being in that building, separated from the laundry room by just 7 floors of concrete and drywall, made my chest tight with panic. I checked into a motel 6 blocks away, paid cash, locked myself in a room that smelled of bleach and cigarette smoke. The marks on my arm had opened again. 3 clean lines that wept clear fluid, not blood. When I pressed a tissue to them, the fabric came away wet but unstained. I fell asleep with the TV on, volume turned up high enough to drown out my own thoughts. In my dreams, I walked the corridor again. The cold spot expanded with each step, spreading like a stain, until the entire hallway was frigid and dark. The laundry room door stood open, and inside, someone was waiting. Long hair plastered to a face I couldn't see. Patient, eternal. In the dream, I kept walking toward it. The building manager called me on Wednesday morning, said there'd been complaints about noise from my unit, specifically the sound of the shower running continuously for 6 hours straight. I was 15 miles away when he called. Hadn't been back to the apartment since Monday night. He wanted to send maintenance up to check for a leak. I told him I'd been home the whole time, that everything was fine, that the neighbors must be mistaken. My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Too high, too fast. He didn't believe me, but he also didn't push. After I hung up, I sat in the motel parking lot and stared at my phone. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers, 2 voicemails, but when I played them back, there was only silence. Not even static. Just the empty sound of an open line, as if someone was listening from the other end, waiting for me to speak first. The marks on my arm spelled something now. I couldn't quite read it. The letters were backwards, or in a language I didn't know, or simply shaped in a way my brain refused to process. But they spelled something. I was certain of it. I drove back to the building that afternoon, parked across the street and watched the entrance for 2 hours. Residents came and went. The mailman made his rounds. A woman walked 3 small dogs past my car, her breath misting in the unseasonably cold air. Everything looked normal. Everything was normal. But I could feel it, even from here. That pull, that patient, insistent invitation. The building seemed to lean toward me, windows reflecting the gray sky like dozens of watching eyes. My forearm itched. I went back inside at sunset. Told myself I just needed to grab some clothes, my laptop, important documents. Told myself I'd be in and out in 10 minutes. Told myself I was still in control of this situation, that I was making rational choices based on practical needs. The elevator ride up was normal. The hallway on my floor was normal. My apartment door was locked, just as I'd left it. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be. Dishes in the sink from Sunday morning, book open on the coffee table. The shirt I'd been wearing Monday night draped over the back of a chair, except for the wet footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom. They weren't there when I came in. I'd looked at the floor as I entered, checking for exactly this kind of thing. But now, small puddles marked a path across the hardwood, each footprint slightly smaller than my own. They glistened in the fading light from the window. I followed them. The trail led to my bedroom door, which stood open. Past the threshold, the footprints continued to my bed and stopped. The comforter was pulled back on one side, as if someone had climbed in and was waiting there, hidden beneath the covers. My mouth went dry. The marks on my arm burned with such intensity I had to grip the door frame to keep from doubling over. The shape under the covers was wrong. Too long in some places, too angular in others. Not quite human, but trying very hard to approximate the form. I should have run, should have called the police, called anyone. But instead, I heard myself speaking. "What do you want?" The room was silent. Then, slowly, the covers began to move, not being pulled back, not sliding off. They were sinking down, collapsing, as if whatever was underneath them was dissolving, melting into the mattress. In seconds, the bed was flat again, empty. The wet footprints evaporated, leaving only dry wood. But in the sudden quiet, I heard it. From 7 floors below, muffled but distinct, the sound of the dryer, spinning. I'm writing this from my apartment. It's 9:42 p.m. The dryer has been running for 3 hours straight. I can hear it through the floor, through the walls, through the pillow I've pressed against my ears. Maintenance won't answer their phones. The building manager hasn't responded to my emails. My neighbors, when I knocked on their doors, either didn't answer or claimed they heard nothing unusual. The marks on my arm have faded completely, but now, when I look in the mirror, I can see 3 parallel lines rising beneath the skin of my throat. Just faint outlines, but they're there, growing clearer by the hour. In 5 minutes, it will be 9:47 p.m. The cold spot will appear, and I know, with the certainty of someone who has already made a choice they don't remember making, that I'm going to walk down there. The laundry room is waiting. It's always been waiting. The only question I can't answer, the one that keeps me frozen here, pen in hand, watching the clock tick toward the inevitable, is whether I'm walking down to finally understand what's happening to me, or if I've been walking toward it all along. If every choice I've made since that first night was mine at all, or if the path was laid out long before I ever moved into this building. The dryer just stopped. The silence is worse. Story 3. The shelves know what I need before I do. I tell myself this is coincidence, pattern seeking in the dim hours when exhaustion plays tricks on perception. But the metal sang 3 times last night. Sharp, deliberate pings that cut through the silence of my 3rd floor walk-up, and I found myself standing before the restoration drama section at 2:47 a.m., holding a volume I hadn't touched in months, open to an annotation that answered a question I'd only half formed in my mind. The handwriting wasn't mine. It started 6 weeks ago, during one of those November nights when Boston's cold seeps through the old window frames and settles into your bones. I was working on a comparative analysis of revenge tragedies, surrounded by stacks of Dover editions and Arden anthologies, when I thought about checking a particular scene in the Revenger's tragedy, not urgently. Just a passing consideration I dismissed because the book was shelved deep in the 3rd row, behind 2 layers of other volumes, and I was comfortable in my nest of papers and coffee cups. Then came the sound, a soft thump against the hardwood floor behind my desk chair. I turned to find the book face down, pages splayed, exactly where I would have set it had I retrieved it myself. The apartment's floorboards are uneven. The whole building tilts slightly after a century of settling, so books do occasionally slide. But this one had been wedged tight between a collected Marlowe and a critical edition of Webster, on a shelf recessed a full 18 inches from the edge. I picked it up. It had fallen open to Act 3, Scene 5. The exact scene I'd been considering. A passage was underlined in faded pencil, and in the margin, someone had written, "Note the temporal collapse. Past murders echo in present tense. The dead direct the living." The annotation was signed with initials, R.H. The same initials appeared on the bookplate inside the front cover. From the library of R. Holloway, 3rd floor, 47 Ashfield Street. My address. My floor. The handwriting had the careful precision of an older generation, when penmanship was taught with rigor. I'd seen these markings before, scattered throughout my collection. Nearly 2/3 of my books had come from estate sales and used bookstores, but I'd never paid much attention to them. That night, I paid attention. I found R.H. everywhere. In a 1947 edition of The White Devil, in pencil, Webster understood, "We are our own ghosts." In a water-stained Duchess of Malfi, "The torture is in anticipation, the not knowing." In The Changeling, next to a scene about madness. How do we distinguish between vision and delusion when both feel equally real? By dawn, I'd gone through 37 volumes. 29 had annotations, all in the same hand, all signed R.H. The observations were brilliant, the kind of insights I wished I'd made myself. Whoever Holloway was, he'd read these plays with an intensity that bordered on obsession. His notes didn't just analyze the texts. They engaged in conversation with them, arguing with characters, questioning motives, drawing connections across centuries of drama. He'd been a scholar, clearly, perhaps a professor, almost certainly alone like me, spending long nights in this same room, at perhaps the same desk, reading by lamplight while the city slept below. I felt a strange kinship with him, also a creeping unease I couldn't quite name. The second incident happened 4 days later. I was researching the influence of Senecan revenge on English drama and needed to cross-reference a passage from Thyestes. The book was in Latin, filed on the top shelf of my far bookcase, behind volumes I hadn't consulted in over a year. I made a mental note to get it in the morning when I had better light and a step stool. 3 metallic pings rang out from across the room. I froze. The sound had come from the shelf itself, the bracket screws vibrating against the wall anchors, perhaps, or the metal support bars expanding in the heat. Old buildings make noises, radiators clank, pipes knock, wood settles and groans. I'd lived here 18 months. I knew its vocabulary of creaks and sighs. This was different. This was deliberate. 3 pings, evenly spaced, almost like a summons. I walked over slowly, heart rate elevated in a way I told myself was irrational. The Latin Thyestes was jutting out from the shelf, just an inch, but enough to be noticeable. It hadn't been like that 5 minutes ago. I would have noticed. I pulled it down. Inside, I found a letter being used as a bookmark, folded between pages 47 and 48. The paper had yellowed to the color of old bone, and the typewriter font was from an era before word processors. It was dated March 15, 1983, and addressed to R. Holloway at this address. The letter was from a university press, rejecting a manuscript submission titled The Architecture of Anticipation, Terror and Temporality in Renaissance Tragedy. The editor praised the insight but found the theoretical framework too personal, too invested in subjective experience to meet academic standards. They suggested Holloway was perhaps too close to the material, unable to maintain critical distance. There was a handwritten note scrawled at the bottom of the rejection letter in the same careful script I'd seen in the margins. They don't understand. The distance is the problem. You have to let the text consume you. You have to listen. I should have stopped reading the annotations after that. Should have boxed up the books with marginalia and stored them in the basement. Should have recognized the warning signs of someone who'd lost themselves in scholarship, who'd confused study with communion. Instead, I started seeking them out. I began keeping a notebook, cataloging Holloway's insights. His observations were too valuable to ignore, too precisely aligned with my own research interests. He'd made connections I was still groping toward, identified patterns I'd only intuited. It felt like finding a mentor, albeit one who existed only in pencil marks and faded ink. The shelves helped me find what I needed. That's how I started thinking about it, though I recognized the absurdity even as the thought formed. When I needed a specific reference, a particular book would be slightly askew on the shelf or positioned at an angle that caught the light differently. Once I woke at 3 a.m. with a half-remembered quote nagging at the edge of consciousness, and when I stumbled into my study, I found a slim volume of the Spanish tragedy lying on my desk, open to the exact passage I'd been trying to recall. I had no memory of taking it down. The metal pings became more frequent, 3 sharp notes that would sound whenever I thought about avoiding a reference check, whenever I considered leaving a question unresolved. At first, they startled me. Then they became expected. Then, and this is when I should have recognized how far I'd drifted, they became comforting. Like having a research assistant who anticipated my needs, who knew the collection as intimately as I did. Better than I did, actually, because there were books I didn't remember acquiring. A first edition of The Broken Heart, signed by the author in 1633. A manuscript facsimile of the atheist's tragedy, with production notes in the margins. A privately printed collection of revenge plays from a 1920s academic series I'd never heard of. They appeared on my shelves gradually, nestled among the familiar volumes, and I'd noticed them only when I needed them. Each bore Holloway's bookplate. Each contained his annotations. I told myself I must have bought them and forgotten. Estate sale impulse purchases, late-night online bidding I didn't recall. I'd been working long hours, sleeping irregularly. Memory lapses were normal under such conditions, but I couldn't explain how they ended up shelved in exactly the right places. alphabetized perfectly, as if they'd always been there. I decided to research R. Holloway himself. The building's landlord was unhelpful, citing privacy policies and hazy memory. But the local historical society had records. I spent an afternoon in their archives, searching property transfers and resident listings for 47 Ashfield Street. Raymond Holloway had lived in my apartment from 1967 to 1984. He'd been a doctoral candidate at Boston University, studying early modern drama. His dissertation was never completed. In March 1984, he'd been found by a neighbor, sitting at his desk, surrounded by open books, staring at nothing, catatonic. He'd been institutionalized at a private psychiatric facility in western Massachusetts. The intake notes, which I obtained through channels I'm not proud of, mentioned acute dissociative state and elaborate delusional system involving textual communication. The attending psychiatrist had written, "Patient insists the books are speaking to him, providing answers before questions are asked. Believes he is engaged in conversation with previous readers across time. Shows no insight into pathology." Holloway had never recovered. He'd remained in care until his death in 1991, at age 49. The cause was listed as pneumonia, but the medical notes mentioned he'd stopped eating in his final weeks, stopped responding to any stimuli except when someone read aloud from Renaissance plays. Then his eyes would focus, and his lips would move, mouthing words that didn't quite sync with the text being read. I closed the archive file with hands that shook slightly. I told myself this changed nothing. Holloway's mental illness didn't invalidate his scholarly insights. The annotations were still valuable. The book still contained useful information. But that night, when I returned to my apartment, I noticed something new. The annotations had multiplied, not in the sense that new ones had appeared, though I couldn't be completely certain, but in that I was seeing them everywhere now, on every page, in every margin. More than I'd noticed before, much more. Some were dated, spanning from 1968 to early 1984, documenting nearly 16 years of obsessive reading and rereading. I watched his handwriting evolve from neat academic script to increasingly frantic scrawls, the observations becoming less analytical and more conversational. Are you reading this too? Do you feel them watching? The margins are liminal spaces. Between text and world, between then and now, I thought I was studying them. But they were preparing me. Don't resist. Let them show you. They only want to help. These were written in the final months based on the dates, January through March 1984, right before his breakdown. The handwriting was barely legible, pressed so hard into the paper that it had torn through in places. On the last dated entry, March 14, 1984, one day before the rejection letter, he'd written in the margin of The Duchess of Malfi, "I understand now. The collection chooses its keeper. The books need a reader. The dead need a voice. Tomorrow I'll show them. I'll prove I've been listening." There was nothing after that. I should have stopped. Should have seen the trajectory, the warning written in someone else's madness. Should have boxed every book and donated the entire collection. Instead, I kept reading. The apartment changed as winter deepened, or my perception of it changed. I stopped being able to distinguish which. The shadows fell differently now, creating pockets of darkness that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The floorboards creaked with footsteps that weren't mine, or were they my own steps, echoing back with a delay I couldn't quite measure. The radiators knocked in patterns that felt almost rhythmic, almost like Morse code, almost like language. 3 pings. Always 3. I started finding Holloway's notes before I looked for relevant passages. They'd be there waiting, marking exactly what I needed, as if he'd known what I would research 40 years in the future. As if the scholarship was a script we were both following, written by something else entirely. I discovered patterns in the annotations. When read in sequence across multiple books, they formed a larger argument about the nature of tragedy and time. Holloway had believed, or come to believe, that revenge tragedies weren't just depicting cyclical violence, but were themselves caught in loops, that the plays created temporal eddies where past and future collapsed into a perpetual present tense, That readers didn't interpret the texts so much as become absorbed into them, becoming characters in an ongoing drama that never quite concluded. "We are all revenging ghosts," he'd written, haunting pages, waiting for the next reader to give us voice. I stopped sleeping regularly, would sit at my desk until dawn, following trains of thought that felt simultaneously mine and not mine, reading passages that seemed to read me back. The books began to feel warm in my hands, as if recently held. Sometimes I'd open one and find the pages still settling, still floating down from being turned by fingers I couldn't see. My advisor emailed, concerned about my lack of contact. I replied that I was making excellent progress, that I'd stumbled onto a cache of secondary material that was revolutionizing my approach. I didn't mention that the secondary material consisted of a dead man's marginal annotations, or that I'd started responding to them, writing my own notes and dialogue with his observations, creating a conversation across decades. I didn't mention that sometimes, when I wrote a question in the margin, I'd return hours later to find an answer in handwriting that looked almost like mine but wasn't quite. The letters slightly more cramped, the baseline tilting at a different angle. Last week, I found the final piece. Hidden inside a collection of Middleton plays was a manila folder containing Holloway's unpublished manuscript. The Architecture of Anticipation, complete. 300 pages of dense theoretical analysis arguing that Renaissance tragedy had created a feedback loop in consciousness itself, that the plays had opened channels in perception that remained open, that readers across centuries became nodes in a network of tragic awareness, experiencing the same patterns of anticipation and dread that the original audiences felt. That the terror wasn't in the plays. It was in the reading of them, in the space between word and understanding, where meaning forms and reforms endlessly. The conclusion was chilling. The plays don't end. They echo. They require witnesses to complete the cycle. Each reader becomes another character, another victim of the plot that never quite resolves. We think we're observing tragedy. We're participating in it. The manuscript was rejected for good reason. It wasn't scholarship anymore. It was testimony. It was a warning that read like madness. I recognized every argument in it because I'd been thinking the same thoughts, following the same lines of reasoning, arriving at the same conclusions. I am doing exactly what Holloway did. The shelves are singing more frequently now. 3 pings that wake me at odd hours. 3 pings when I think about calling my advisor, about expressing concern, about admitting I might need help. 3 pings that guide me back to the desk, to the books, to the annotations that feel less like historical artifacts and more like instructions. I've started to notice that my own handwriting is changing, becoming more careful, more precise, more like his. I've started to notice that I'm losing track of which notes are his and which are mine. I've started to notice that the collection has grown again. Books I definitely didn't acquire, bearing book plates with my own name, dated months in the future, filled with annotations and handwriting that might be mine, might be Holloway's, might be someone else's entirely. Someone who hasn't lived here yet but will. Someone who will find these same books and think these same thoughts and write these same warnings that no one heeds. The manuscript ends with a handwritten addendum, undated. To whoever reads this next, I'm sorry. I tried to resist. I tried to leave. But the collection needs its keeper. The books need their reader. The patterns need to complete. You're already becoming what I became, what the previous tenant became, what the next one will become. The apartment remembers. The shelves remember. We don't read them. They read us. 3 pings ring out behind me as I write this. I know what they mean. I know what book they're summoning me toward. I know which passage I'll find marked, which annotation will be waiting, which question it will answer before I've consciously formed it. The terrible thing isn't that I don't understand what's happening. The terrible thing is that I do, and I'm walking toward the shelf anyway, my hand reaching for the spine that's calling to me, ready to open to the page that's been waiting, ready to read the words that are reading me, ready to add my own notes to the margins, my own voice to the chorus of keepers who thought they were scholars, but became something else. Something that exists in the space between texts and time, between past readers and future ones. between the person I was and the person I'm becoming. The book is warm in my hands. It always is. And tomorrow, someone else will move into this apartment, will buy my collection at an estate sale, will spend long nights studying by lamplight while the city sleeps below, and the shelves will learn their needs, and 3 pings will sing out in the darkness, and the annotations will wait. I'm adding this final note because I can't not add it, because the compulsion to complete the pattern is stronger than reason, stronger than fear, stronger than the part of me that's still screaming to stop. If you're reading this, you're already too late. The moment you felt drawn to these books, the moment you appreciated Holloway's insights, the moment you started seeing patterns, you became part of the sequence. We're not collecting books. We're being collected. By what? I don't know. The texts themselves? The accumulated weight of every reader who came before? Some intelligence that lives in interpretation itself? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you'll understand soon. You're already understanding. You're already hearing the metal sing. 3 pings, always 3, like a heartbeat that isn't yours, like a pulse in the walls, like time collapsing. The shelf behind me is ringing again. I can feel which book it wants me to read next. I can almost see the passage that's waiting, can almost read the annotation that will answer the question I'm about to ask. I should stop writing, should close this document, should walk away. But my hand is already moving toward the shelf, and the books are already warm. And somewhere in the margins, in handwriting I'll recognize as my own even though I haven't written it yet, the next note is waiting to be read. Story 4. The brownstone chose me, not the other way around. That's what I kept telling myself during those first weeks in Hartford, when the rent seemed too reasonable and the landlord too eager to sign. 3 stories of Victorian architecture on a tree-lined street where the gas lamps still worked, where frost patterns on the windows looked deliberate in the morning light. The kind of place you stumble into when you're running from something. In my case, a failed marriage and a consulting job that had hollowed me out from the inside. The real estate agent never mentioned the woman. She talked about the crown molding, the original hardwood floors, the clawfoot tub on the 2nd floor. She didn't talk about the way the hall runner, a Persian thing in deep burgundy and gold, would be waiting for me after late nights at the office, folded with surgical precision at the exact center, a perfect right angle that caught the toe of my shoe like a trap. The first time, I blamed the cleaning service. The second time, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd kicked it in my morning rush, still half asleep, coffee deprived. By the 5th time, I stopped making excuses and started coming home earlier. The brownstone had rules I was only beginning to understand, rules that whispered in the settling of floorboards, in the way certain doors preferred to stay closed, in the draft that moved through the 1st floor hallway, even when every window was sealed tight. I learned to step over the runner rather than straighten it. I learned that the house responded to intrusion the way some people respond to criticism, with silence first, then with something more pointed. It was a Tuesday when I saw her, 3 weeks into my lease. I'd stayed late at the office trying to salvage a client presentation that was dying by inches, and the November darkness had swallowed Hartford whole by the time I pushed through the front door. The hallway stretched ahead of me, that long corridor from entrance to kitchen, and the mirror, original to the house, the agent had said, part of a matching console table, caught me as I shrugged off my coat. She was standing in the reflection, not behind me, not beside me, in the mirror, as if the glass were a doorway she'd stepped through. High-collared dress in dove gray, hair pulled back so severely it looked painful, one pale finger extended toward something I couldn't see. Her lips moved, forming words the mirror wouldn't release. I spun around. The hallway was empty, the silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, too fast, too loud. When I turned back to the mirror, I was alone in the reflection. Just me, my rumpled shirt, the shadows gathering in the corners of the frame. But her finger had been pointing. I followed the angle, traced it to the back of the house, to the kitchen door that led to the narrow garden I'd never bothered to explore. The door with the old deadbolt that stuck, the one I'd been meaning to have serviced. I locked it that night, tested it twice. feeling the bolt slide home with a metallic certainty that should have been comforting. At 3:17 a.m., my phone lit up with a notification from the security system I'd installed the first week. More paranoia than practicality, or so I'd thought. Motion detected. Rear door. Someone was trying the handle, working it with patience, with determination. The camera showed nothing but darkness and the suggestion of movement, a disturbance in the shadows that might have been wind, might have been something else. I watched from my bedroom window as the motion sensor light flooded the garden. Nothing. No one running, no footsteps on the gravel path, no gate swinging closed in hasty retreat. Just the light, stark and accusatory, illuminating empty space. The lavender came the next evening. I smelled it before I reached the front steps. That particular scent of dried flowers and old sachets, the kind that belongs in grandmother's closets and estate sales. It hung in the air like a warning. And when I opened the door, the runner was folded again. That same perfect angle, that same deliberate placement. The pattern established itself with cruel efficiency. Late nights brought the folded runner. The lavender scent preceded the security alerts, sometimes by minutes, sometimes by hours, but always before. The woman in the mirror appeared less frequently, but when she did, she was more urgent, her pointing finger trembling with what might have been frustration or fear. I started researching the house. The Hartford Historical Society had records dating back to 1887, when the brownstone was built for a family whose name had been scratched out of the original deed. The librarian who helped me, a thin man with kind eyes who never asked why I wanted to know, mentioned that the property had changed hands 17 times in the past century. An unusual number, he said, for such a desirable location. Some of the previous tenants had left notes in the margins of old property surveys, cramped handwriting that deteriorated into illegibility, references to disturbances, and unnatural persistence. One notation dated 1952 simply read, "She knows. She always knows." I stopped going to the office. Started working from the second-floor study, where the window overlooked the street and I could see anyone approaching. The house settled around me like a living thing, creaking and sighing through the short December days. The lavender became more insistent, stronger, until it seemed to seep from the very walls. My business partner called, concerned about the client presentation I'd abandoned mid-sentence during a video call. I'd been staring at something over the camera, he said. Something that had drained the color from my face. I didn't remember. I remembered the lavender, suddenly overwhelming, and the sound of footsteps in the hall outside my study, deliberate and measured, though the security system showed I was alone. The mirror became my obsession. I would stand in front of it for hours, waiting for her to appear, to give me some explanation, some context for the warnings, because that's what they were. Warnings. The runner marking the threshold between safety and danger. The lavender announcing the approach of something I couldn't see but could feel. A presence that tested the doors, that walked the perimeter of the house in those dead hours before dawn. I started taking photographs of the mirror at different times, different angles, trying to capture her. The images showed only my own deteriorating appearance. The circles under my eyes deepening, my clothes hanging looser, the stubble becoming a beard I didn't remember deciding to grow. But in one photo, taken at twilight with my phone's flash disabled, there was something else. A suggestion of movement in the background, a blur that could have been a trick of low light or could have been the edge of a gray dress, the curve of a severely pulled back hairstyle. The security system evolved its own language. Motion at the rear door, motion at the basement windows, motion in the garden, where the old stone bench sat among the overgrown rosemary and mint. I stopped responding to the alerts, stopped checking the cameras. What was the point? Nothing was ever there, and yet something was always there, patient and methodical, testing for weakness. I found the letters in the third week of December, tucked behind a loose baseboard in the second-floor bedroom. 7 envelopes, yellowed with age, addressed to someone named Millicent. The postmarks were illegible, but the handwriting was elegant, formal. I opened them on the study floor, hands shaking for reasons I couldn't name. They were warnings. All of them. A sister writing to Millicent, begging her to leave the house, to abandon whatever compulsion kept her there. "He knows when you're alone," one letter read. "He watches from the garden. You must leave before he finds his way in." Another was more direct. "The lavender is not protection enough. It only delays him. Please, before it's too late." The last letter was different. Shorter, written in what looked like haste, the ink blotted and smeared. "I understand now. You're not waiting for help. You're standing guard. But Millicent, what happens when you tire? What happens when you fail?" I read them again and again, trying to parse their meaning, to fit them into the topology of dread that had taken over my life. Millicent in the mirror, pointing toward danger. Millicent folding the runner to mark the threshold. Millicent sending the lavender like smoke signals from some other dimension of the house. But standing guard against what? The answer came on the longest night of the year. I'd given up on sleep entirely by then, sustained by coffee and the manic energy of someone whose grip on reality had become negotiable. The house was decorated for a Christmas I wouldn't celebrate. I'd put up a tree in some fit of normalcy, hung lights I never turned on. The decorations felt like props in a play I was performing for an audience of one. The lavender hit me as I climbed the stairs to bed, so strong it made my eyes water. I stopped on the landing, every nerve ending suddenly alive with animal awareness. The security system was silent. No notifications, no alerts. But the scent was overwhelming, urgent, screaming a warning I was finally ready to hear. I went to the mirror. She was there, clearer than she'd ever been, her face pale and drawn, her eyes meeting mine with desperate intensity. She pointed toward the rear of the house, her gesture more violent now, more demanding. I walked to the kitchen, each step feeling like movement through deep water. The door to the garden was still locked. I'd checked it that morning, as I did every morning. The deadbolt was secure. But the lock on the basement door, the interior door I never used, that opened onto stairs leading down to a cellar I'd avoided since the day I moved in, was turning. Slowly, deliberately. Someone on the other side working the mechanism with practiced patience, the way they'd been working it for weeks, for months, for however long it took to learn the patterns of the house and its occupant. I stood frozen, watching the knob rotate with mechanical precision. Clockwise, then back. Testing. Learning. The lavender was suffocating now, and I understood, finally, terribly, that Millicent wasn't haunting me. She was protecting me. The runner warned me when I was vulnerable, returning late and distracted. The mirror showed me where danger approached. The lavender gave me time to prepare, to lock doors, to stay vigilant. But I'd stopped checking the basement. I dismissed it as unused space, irrelevant to my life on the upper floors. I'd forgotten that old houses have bones, have access points that predate modern security, that remember older forms of intrusion. The knob stopped turning. The silence that followed was worse than any sound could have been. I backed away from the door, my hand finding my phone, pulling up the security app. The basement camera, I'd installed one, hadn't I, showed static, just gray snow, as if something were deliberately blocking the signal. I went back to the mirror. Millicent was still there, but her expression had changed. No longer urgent, no longer warning. She looked resigned, perhaps even sympathetic, the way someone looks at a chess player who's just realized they've been in checkmate for the last 3 moves. Her lips moved again, and this time I could almost hear the words, almost feel them vibrating in the air between the glass and my reality. Lock the basement from the outside, board it, leave. But I didn't leave. I stood there in the hallway, in the house that had chosen me, or that I had chosen in my desperation to escape my old life. I thought about the 17 previous tenants, about the notes in the margins of old surveys, about a woman who had died, or changed, in this house, and somehow remained, standing watch, buying time for strangers who would never know her name. The lavender was fading now, giving way to something else, a smell of damp earth and old stone, of things that grow in darkness. The scent of the basement, seeping upward through cracks in the foundation, through gaps around the door frame. I locked the basement door from the outside, wedged a chair under the knob, pushed the kitchen table against it. Temporary measures. Insufficient measures. The kind of thing you do when you know it won't work but need to feel like you're fighting back. Then I went upstairs and started packing. But here's the thing they don't tell you about houses like this, about situations like this, about the kind of dread that soaks into your bones like winter rain. Leaving doesn't mean you're safe. It just means you're somewhere else, carrying the knowledge that you've been chosen for something, marked by something, that patience and persistence can breach any barrier given enough time. I'm writing this from a hotel room in Providence, 3 states away. I left the brownstone 2 days ago, packed what I could carry, and abandoned the rest. I called the landlord and told him I was breaking the lease, that he could keep the deposit, that I would never set foot in Hartford again. But the lavender followed me. I smelled it in the hotel elevator last night. I saw a woman in a high collar reflected in the bathroom mirror this morning, pointing toward the door with that same desperate urgency. And when I checked my security app, the one still connected to the brownstone system, the basement door was open. Standing wide in the darkness of the feed, as if something had finally completed its patient work, had finally found its way through. The motion sensors in the house are going off in sequence, room by room, floor by floor, as if something is moving through the space I abandoned, learning its layout, understanding its geography, or perhaps tracking the scent I left behind. The lavender is stronger now. I can smell it through the hotel room's recycled air, through the industrial cleaning products and the ghost of someone else's cigarette smoke. It's trying to warn me about something, about a door I forgot to check, about a threshold I left unwatched. I'm looking at the bathroom door. The lock is one of those simple push-button affairs, the kind designed for privacy, not security. The kind of thing that wouldn't stop anyone, or anything, truly determined to get in. The scent is overwhelming now. I can hear the lock turning. And in the mirror above the sink, Millicent is shaking her head, her expression sorrowful and knowing, as if she's watched this scene play out before, in other rooms, with other people who thought distance could save them from what had already chosen them as its own. The lavender is her apology. I understand that now. Too late. Story 5. The master suite had been mine for 3 years before he started staying over. 3 years of perfect silence, of air that moved only when I wanted it to, of shadows that stayed where they belonged. I'd converted the space myself, stripped the wallpaper, sanded the floors, painted the walls that particular shade of off-white that catches afternoon light just right. Every screw, every coat of varnish, every careful measurement had been mine alone. The room knew me. I told myself that's why it felt so strange when he first slept over. The air seemed denser somehow, like the room was holding its breath. I'd wake at 3 a.m. to find the temperature had dropped 10 degrees, though the thermostat showed no change. Small things. Ignorable things. But then it started happening when he was awake too. The first real incident was the TV. We'd been watching something forgettable, some documentary about coral reefs, when he reached for the remote on the coffee table. The screen went black the instant his fingers touched it. Not gradually, just a sudden cut to darkness. No fade, no warning. He pressed the power button. Nothing. I took the remote from his hand, pressed the same button, and the TV blazed back to life mid-sentence, the narrator's voice picking up exactly where it had left off. He laughed it off, said something about my touch being magic. I laughed too, but I'd felt it. That split second of resistance before the TV obeyed me, like it was considering refusing. The desk fan was next. I'd positioned it in the corner, angled to create a cross breeze with the window. Perfect circulation. But the morning after he stayed over for the 3rd time, I woke to find it had rotated 180 degrees, blowing directly at my side of the bed. Not his side. Mine. The oscillation switch was off. It couldn't have turned itself gradually. Someone would have had to physically grip the base and twist it around. I asked him if he'd moved it. He was still asleep, curled into the far edge of the mattress, one arm dangling off the side. His breathing had that deep, unconscious rhythm that can't be faked. I turned the fan back, watched it for a full minute, waiting for something. It stayed still, blades spinning in their proper direction, but I could swear I felt disapproval radiating from its cheap plastic housing. The smell started that same week. Old tobacco smoke, the kind that soaked into fabric and wood for decades. I'd never smoked. The previous owners were a young couple who'd moved to Seattle. I'd met them, smelled nothing but vanilla candles and dog. But now, whenever I closed the windows at night, that stale reek would seep from somewhere. Not the vents, not the closet. Just there, hanging in the air like an accusation. He noticed it too, wrinkled his nose, asked if I'd had friends over. I told him no. He suggested maybe it was coming from outside, from a neighbor's place. But the smell only appeared when the windows were shut, when the room was sealed, when we were sealed inside together. I started opening the windows even on cold nights. The room's temperature would drop to 50 degrees, and I'd pile on blankets, breathing frost, rather than face that tobacco ghost. The canvas incident happened on a Tuesday. We'd bought it together at a flea market in East Austin, an abstract piece, all blues and grays that reminded me of water. I'd hung it on the wall opposite the bed, level and secure, using proper wall anchors. The first time it fell was while we were in bed, talking about something mundane, his work schedule, weekend plans. We'd been laughing. I remember that specifically, the way his laugh filled the room in a way mine never had, when the canvas simply dropped. Not tilted, not slipped, dropped straight down like someone had cut the wire. I got up, examined the mount. The anchors were still firmly embedded in the wall. The hanging wire was intact, still looped around the hook. Impossible that it had simply fallen. I hung it again, testing the weight, making sure it was secure. 2 hours later, we were laughing again. He'd told a story about his sister's cat, and the canvas fell again. Same wall, same impossible drop. This time I left it on the floor, leaning against the baseboard. I could feel the room watching me make that choice. Feel it. Satisfied. That's when I started noticing the pattern. The disturbances only happened when he was there. When I was alone, everything worked perfectly. The TV responded instantly to the remote. The fan stayed pointed where I put it. The air smelled like nothing but the lavender detergent I used on the sheets. The canvas stayed on the wall. I'd rehung it during one of his absences, and it had remained perfectly level for 5 days straight. Then he stayed over on Friday night, and the canvas was on the floor by Saturday morning. I started testing it. Small experiments. I'd leave my laptop open to a specific page, and when he arrived, the browser would be closed. Just that program. Everything else running normally. But the browser shut down as if by deliberate hand. I'd set my coffee mug on the right side of my desk, my preferred spot, and find it move to the left when I came back from the bathroom. Always when he was in the apartment. Always small enough to doubt. The room was rearranging itself around him. Or around us. I couldn't tell which. He started noticing my noticing. Asked if everything was okay. Said I seemed distracted. I wanted to tell him. Wanted to ask if he felt it too. The way the space contracted when we were both inside it. The way the air pressure seemed to build like a storm forming. But how do you say that? How do you tell someone that your home is jealous without sounding completely insane? So I said I was tired. Work stress. He accepted this. Offered to give me space if I needed it. And the room seemed to warm at the suggestion. Seemed to exhale. Seemed to settle into its usual comfortable silence. But I didn't want space from him. That was the problem. I wanted him there. Wanted his laugh and his warmth and the way he made coffee in the morning, humming off key. I wanted him there, but the room didn't. The room wanted what we'd had before. Just me, just the silence, just the perfect isolated equilibrium we'd maintained for 3 years. The territorial behavior escalated. I'd go to kiss him, and the lamp would flicker. Not a power surge, just that lamp, just that moment. We'd lie in bed together and the floorboards would creak in sequence, like footsteps circling us. Slowly, deliberately. The pattern always the same. Start at the door, move along the wall, pause at the foot of the bed. Wait there. I'd count the seconds, never less than 30, never more than 40, before the invisible presence would retreat back to the door. I started sleeping poorly, would wake at 4 a.m. to find myself pressed against the very edge of the mattress, as if I'd been slowly, incrementally pushed there. He'd be sleeping peacefully in the center, and I'd be clinging to 6 inches of space, my body remembering a pressure I couldn't recall feeling. The worst part was the ambiguity. I could never quite catch it happening, never saw the fan turn, never heard the canvas fall, never felt the laptop keys being pressed. Everything occurred in the gaps, in the bathroom breaks, in the moments I blinked, in the spaces between attention. I considered moving, thought about finding a new place, starting over somewhere that didn't know me, didn't have 3 years of solitary occupancy soaked into its bones. But the thought of leaving made my chest tight. This was my space. I'd built it, measured every angle, chosen every fixture. It was mine. But was it? Or had I become its? 3 weeks after the canvas fell for the second time, he asked if he could leave some clothes here. Just a few things. Toothbrush, a change of shirt, basics for the mornings after. Practical, reasonable, the kind of thing people do when they're moving towards something more permanent. I said yes. I watched his face light up. I felt the room go cold. That night, alone again, I sat on the edge of the bed and spoke to the empty air. Told it, whatever it was, that I wasn't alone anymore. That I didn't want to be alone anymore. That things change, that spaces have to accommodate growth. The room didn't answer, but the silence felt different. Not peaceful. Listening. His clothes arrived the next weekend. I cleared a drawer, hung space in the closet. He arranged his things carefully, asking where I wanted each item. I told him anywhere was fine. Make yourself at home. The words felt wrong the moment they left my mouth. This wasn't his home. It was tolerating him, at best. That night, every hanger in the closet where his shirts hung had rotated backward, facing the wrong direction. Just those hangers, not mine. I found them at 2 a.m. when I got up for water, opened the closet door looking for a sweatshirt. 12 hangers, all precisely reversed, the shirts hanging inside out against the wall like they were trying to hide. I didn't tell him. Fixed them in the dark, hands shaking. The tobacco smell got stronger, started appearing even when the windows were open. I'd wake to it, thick and choking, feel him sleeping peacefully beside me, unaffected. Or was he? I'd catch him awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, and I'd wonder what he was feeling, what he wasn't saying. I started researching. Late-night searches on my phone, locked in the bathroom, haunted houses, psychic imprints, residual energy, explanations that required belief in things I'd never considered. But what was the alternative? That I was imagining it? That seemed harder to believe than ghosts. Or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the isolation had done something to me, twisted something fundamental, and now my mind was inventing resistance where there was none. Maybe the room was just a room, and I was just someone who'd spent too long alone, who'd started mistaking solitude for companionship. I'd test this theory in the morning, I decided. Would ask him directly what he'd noticed, make a list of incidents, see if his matched mine, confirm the shared reality. But morning came, and I couldn't do it. The words stuck in my throat. Because if he said he'd noticed nothing, if the TV had never shut off for him, if the fan had never moved in his memory, if the canvas falls were just gravity and bad mounting, then what would that make me? So I stayed quiet. We made coffee. He hummed that off-key melody. I watched the steam rise from my mug and noticed it was on the left side of the desk again, though I'd set it down on the right. He kissed me goodbye at the door, said he'd see me Thursday. I watched him walk to his car, get in, drive away. The moment his taillights disappeared around the corner, the apartment exhaled. The air warmed. The pressure lifted. Everything settled into its familiar configuration. I stood in the doorway, key in hand, understanding with perfect clarity that I was being given a choice. I could keep this, The silence, the perfect equilibrium, the space that knew me and only me. Or I could keep him, and whatever battle of wills that would entail. The room waited for my decision. I could feel it waiting, patient, certain. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The lock clicked with a sound like satisfaction. I walked to the canvas on the floor, still there where it had fallen weeks ago, and picked it up. Held it. All those blues and grays like water, like something that moves, that changes, that refuses to stay still. I hung it back on the wall, tested the weight, made sure it was secure. Then I texted him, "Leave your drawer as full as you want. This is your space too." The temperature dropped. The lamp flickered once, twice. The fan rotated slowly, a full 360 degrees, like something stretching, testing its range. I sat on the bed and waited. For what, I didn't know. Escalation. Acceptance. Some kind of resolution. But the room just watched, and I realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, that this wasn't about winning or losing. This was about endurance, about who could outlast whom. The canvas was still on the wall when I finally fell asleep, but I didn't check it when I woke up. I was afraid of what I might find. Story 6. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a dream bleeding into consciousness, that half-awake state where reality and sleep trade places without asking permission. The piano came soft through the walls of the Richmond house, a melody so slow it felt like someone was counting heartbeats between each note. I lay there in the darkness, listening to my own pulse, trying to match it to the rhythm. It wouldn't sync. The house was old, the kind of place where wood sighs in the night and pipes clank out Morse code messages to rooms you haven't discovered yet. The landlord had warned me about the water pressure and the temperamental furnace, but he'd said nothing about music. I'd taken the place because it was cheap and because I needed somewhere quiet to finish my thesis. The university was a 15-minute walk. The neighborhood was dead after 9. Perfect, except for the piano. I got up that first night and walked through the house, my bare feet finding every cold spot in the hardwood floors. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. When I stood in the living room, it drifted from upstairs. When I climbed the stairs, it retreated to the basement. I opened the basement door and stared down into that throat of darkness, and the music stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong, like the house was holding its breath. I went back to bed and told myself it was the neighbors. Sound does strange things in old houses, travels through vents and hollow walls, finds paths that don't exist in daylight. The second night, I was ready for it. I kept my phone on the nightstand, recorder app open. When the piano started, always around 2:30 I'd noticed. I hit record and lay there, letting it capture whatever was happening. The same slow progression of notes, the same deliberate pace, like someone was learning the piece for the first time, or had forgotten how fingers work. In the morning I played it back. The piano was there, faint but unmistakable. And underneath it, something else. A low rhythmic pulse, almost imperceptible, not random static, a pattern. Oh, I turned the volume up and listened closer, and my skin went cold. It was regular, mechanical, like a metronome ticking somewhere in the dark spaces of the recording. But I didn't own a metronome. The house didn't have a piano. I started recording every night, built up a collection of audio files, each one capturing that same melody, that same underlying pulse. During the day, I'd walk through Richmond's streets, looking at my neighbors' houses, trying to figure out which one held an insomniac pianist. I never saw instruments through any windows, never heard music except in the deep hours of the night. In my house, in my bedroom, the landlord was no help. When I called to ask about previous tenants, he got defensive, asked if there was a problem with the property. I told him no, everything was fine, just curious about the history of the place. He said he'd inherited it from an uncle and didn't know much about its past. His voice had an edge that suggested I shouldn't ask again. I tried sleeping with earplugs. The music found its way in anyway. I tried sleeping with headphones playing white noise. The piano melody wove itself between the static, like it was always there, just waiting to be noticed. Weeks became months. My thesis languished. I spent my days exhausted, my nights cataloging recordings, trying to find meaning in the metronome pulse hidden in each file. I started to recognize the piece. A Chopin nocturne, I thought. Though played so slowly, it took me weeks to identify it. The kind of music meant to be beautiful, rendered strange by the wrong tempo. The smell started in November. Wood polish, old wax. It would hit me at random moments, always strongest when I was near sleep. I'd be drifting off, and suddenly my nose would fill with it, sharp and immediate, like someone had just finished polishing the floors in a house that existed 40 years ago. The scent would drag me back to consciousness, and there would be the piano, right on schedule. I stopped having friends over. How do you explain to someone that your house plays itself music? That you've recorded it, documented it, but can't find its source? I could see it in their eyes when I tried. Concern, discomfort, the quiet calculation of whether I was losing my grip. Maybe I was. I started finding myself in strange places. I'd be working at my desk and realize I was standing in the basement, hand resting on the wall, with no memory of going downstairs. I'd wake up sitting at the small table in the kitchen, my fingers moving against the wood like I was playing invisible keys. Each time, there was that smell. Wax and old wood. Like the house was trying to remember something. The recordings became my obsession. I'd listened to them for hours, isolated the background noise, amplified it. The metronome pulse never varied. Perfectly regular, perfectly mechanical. I counted the beats and realized they matched my resting heart rate. Exactly, not close. Exact. I consulted a sound engineer, brought him my best recording. He looked at me strangely after analyzing it, asked if I was playing a joke. The underlying pulse, he said, wasn't coming from an external source. It was embedded in the ambient sound itself, like someone had encoded it into the room's acoustic signature. Impossible, technically. But there it was. I started sleeping in different rooms, trying to escape it. The guest bedroom, the couch, the bathroom floor. The music followed. Always the same volume, the same slow Chopin, the same invisible metronome counting something I didn't understand. In December, I decided to leave, found another place, started packing. The night before the move, the piano played differently, faster, urgent. I lay in bed, paralyzed by something I couldn't name, and listened to the melody race through its progression. The metronome pulse accelerated too, matching the music, and my heart hammered in my chest, trying to keep up. When it stopped, the silence was so complete I thought I'd gone deaf. I didn't sleep that night. Just lay there, waiting. Nothing came. The new apartment was sterile and modern. No history, no character, no music. I slept for 12 hours the first night, dreamless and deep. Started to convince myself I'd been stressed, sleep-deprived, caught in some kind of feedback loop between anxiety and insomnia. The recordings sat on my phone, but I didn't listen to them. Didn't delete them either. Years passed. I finished my thesis, took a job, built a life that didn't include phantom pianos or impossible metronomes. The Richmond house became a story I told carefully, testing people's reactions, gauging whether they thought I was someone who'd had a strange experience or someone who'd had a breakdown. 3 years later, I found myself in a theater lobby, waiting for a concert to start. The space was beautiful. Restored Victorian architecture, dark wood panels, the smell of old varnish. I was reading the program when the warmth-up started, and a pianist on stage began playing scales. Then he switched to Chopin, the nocturne, the same one. My vision went white at the edges. The lobby floor beneath my feet wasn't marble anymore. It was those old hardwood boards from Richmond, every knot and grain exactly where I remembered. The smell of wood wax overwhelmed everything, so strong I could taste it. People moved around me, but they were far away, on the other side of some membrane I couldn't name. I stood there while the pianist played, and I knew, not remembered, knew, that I'd played this piece. Not learned it, not practiced it. Played it at 2:30 in the morning in a house with no piano. my fingers moving through air, the metronome of my heart keeping perfect time in the dark. When the concert ended, I walked out into the night and pulled out my phone. The old recordings were still there. I hadn't listened to them in years, hadn't needed to. Now I pressed play on the oldest one, from that first week in Richmond. The piano was there, the metronome pulse underneath it. But now I could hear something else, something I'd missed before. Breathing, slow and even, coming from the same distance as the music, from the same source. My breathing. I stood on the sidewalk, listening to 3-year-old audio of myself sleeping while music played, and I understood that I'd been asking the wrong question all along. It wasn't about where the music was coming from. It was about where I went when it played. I scrolled through the recordings, played them one after another. Every single one contained that breathing. My breathing. Always at the same steady rate, never disturbed by the music, like my body knew something my mind refused to accept. The metronome pulse matched my heartbeat. The breathing was mine, and somewhere in those recordings, buried in the layers of sound I'd analyzed and amplified and obsessed over, was the soft creak of footsteps on hardwood floors. Moving, purposeful, following patterns I'd traced but never understood. I deleted the recordings, all of them, watched them disappear one by one from my phone's memory. It didn't matter. I could still hear them. Can still hear them. Sometimes late at night I wake up with the smell of wood wax in my nose and a melody running through my head. My fingers move against the sheets, finding keys that aren't there, keeping time to a metronome that only exists in the dark spaces between thought and action. And I wonder what else I've played, what other rooms I've walked through while my body slept, what other music I've made with instruments that don't exist. The house in Richmond has new tenants now. I checked. I've driven past it twice, late at night, trying to see if there's a light on in my old bedroom window, trying to see if someone else is lying awake, listening to something they can't explain. The windows are always dark, but last week I saw someone standing on the porch, looking out into the street. Just standing there, motionless, at 2:30 in the morning. I couldn't see their face in the darkness, but I saw their hands. They were moving, like they were playing piano. And somewhere, in a part of my mind I can't quite reach, I felt my own fingers begin to move in response, matching their rhythm, following along with a piece I don't remember learning. The metronome keeps time in the dark, even now. Especially now. I just don't know what it's counting down to. Story 7. The memorial sat on what used to be the eastern lawn of Penhurst State School, a mile outside Spring City. October had stripped the maples down to their bones, and the afternoon light came in pale and indirect, the kind that makes everything look like it's behind dirty glass. I'd driven out on a Tuesday because the weekend crowds bothered me. Too many people treating tragedy like a tourist attraction, snapping selfies next to plaques that listed names of the forgotten dead. I wanted quiet. I wanted to read the names properly. The stone marker stood about waist-high, black granite polished to a mirror finish. Carved into its surface were hundreds of names, patients who died at Penhurst between 1908 and 1987, most of them buried in unmarked graves before anyone thought to remember them. The memorial had been erected in 2010, a small gesture toward acknowledging what had happened here, the abuse, the neglect, the warehousing of human beings in conditions that would have shamed a prison. I ran my fingers along the etched letters, feeling the grooves. The stone was cold enough to make my fingertips ache. Around me, the field stretched empty and brown, bordered by a tree line that had gone skeletal. No one else was visible. I'd parked in the small lot a quarter-mile back, and mine had been the only car. That's when it happened. The sound entered my right ear like something threading a needle. It moved across the inside of my skull with geometric precision, a straight line that traced from one ear to the other. Not through my head. That's the crucial detail I keep coming back to. Through the narrow space between my ears, as if my skull were hollow and something invisible had just slipped through it on rails. The quality of it was wrong. wet syllables that dragged and caught, underscored by a hiss like old electricity or air escaping from somewhere it shouldn't. I couldn't parse words, couldn't even identify a language, but the rhythm suggested speech, something trying to communicate through a medium that degraded it, corrupted it. My hands jerked away from the stone. The sound lasted maybe 2 seconds, but in its wake, my ears rang with a pressure change pop, the kind you get on airplanes. That's when I saw him. A man stood about 15 feet away, near the edge of the memorial's brick border. He was staring at me with an expression I recognized immediately because it mirrored what I felt in my own face. Eyebrows up, mouth slightly open, head tilted as if trying to locate a sound's origin point. He was maybe 50, wearing a brown jacket and jeans, ordinary enough that I hadn't noticed him before. We locked eyes. His mouth moved first, forming the words, "Did you?" I nodded before he finished. My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Yeah, I heard it." He stepped closer, moving with the careful deliberation of someone trying not to spook a wild animal, or maybe trying not to spook himself. When he spoke again, his words came measured and precise, as if he were documenting evidence. He described what he'd heard, the entry point, the trajectory, the electrical quality. Every detail matched mine exactly. He even used the same word, rails. He said it felt like something traveling on rails inside his head. We stood there in the empty field, two strangers validating each other's impossible experience, and I felt the first real prickle of fear move down my spine. Shared hallucinations weren't supposed to happen. Folie à deux required prolonged exposure, relationship dynamics, suggestibility. We were random strangers who'd both experienced the identical auditory phenomenon at the identical moment. He suggested we both imagined it, that the power of the place had triggered something, but his voice lacked conviction, and I noticed his eyes kept darting to the memorial stone as if it might do something. That's when I looked down and saw the grass. The field around us was moving, not swaying, moving. Individual blades bent in precise formation, creating a pattern that flowed against the prevailing wind. I felt the breeze on my face, coming from the north. The grass was bending south to north, pushing directly into it. The man saw it too. I watched his face drain of color, the warmth leaving his skin like water soaking into sand. He backed away without saying anything, then turned and walked quickly toward the parking lot, not quite running but close. I wanted to follow, wanted to get away from whatever was happening, but my legs had locked. The grass kept moving. The pattern was spreading, rippling outward from the memorial stone in concentric circles, each blade bending in sequence as if invisible feet were walking across them. But there was no weight, no depression, just the grass moving against the wind in waves. I forced myself to look at the stone again. The names seemed darker than before, the carved letters holding shadows that shouldn't exist under the flat October sky. My vision did something strange, doubled, then refocused, and for a moment, I could have sworn the letters were moving, crawling across the granite like insects. I blinked hard. The letters were still. Of course they were still. Carved stone doesn't move. But I was moving. Backing away now, following the path the other man had taken, though I couldn't see him anymore. The trees at the field's edge looked farther away than they should be, as if the space itself were stretching. My depth perception felt wrong, distorted, like trying to judge distances underwater. The sound came again. This time it entered from the left, traveled right, and I swear to God I felt it. Not just heard it. Felt it. A physical presence sliding through my skull, dragging something wet and electric across neural pathways. The syllables were clearer now, almost forming words, and part of me desperately wanted to understand while another part screamed at me not to listen, not to try to comprehend whatever was attempting communication. I stumbled. My shoe caught on nothing. The ground was level, empty grass, but I went down hard on one knee. The impact jarred my teeth together, and I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. The pain felt distant, muffled, as if it were happening to someone else, and I was just watching through their eyes. When I looked up, the memorial stone was closer. I hadn't moved toward it. I'd fallen backward, away from it. But it was closer now, maybe 10 feet instead of 15. The black granite surface reflected the sky, but the reflection was wrong. The clouds in the reflection were moving faster than the real clouds above me, time-lapse rapid, and the angle was wrong, showing sky that should have been out of view. I could hear my breathing, harsh and rapid in my ears. My heart was a fist pounding against my ribs. Every instinct I had screamed to run, but I couldn't look away from the stone, from the names, from the way they seemed to be watching me despite being nothing but carved letters. The grass around the memorial began to move differently now. Instead of concentric circles, the blades formed lines, straight paths that led from the stone's edges outward like spokes on a wheel. They pointed in specific directions, and when I followed one with my eyes, I saw it led to a depression in the earth about 20 feet away. A subtle dip in the ground, rectangular in shape, grave-sized. There were others. As my eyes adjusted to the patterns, I saw them everywhere. Dozens of shallow depressions scattered across the field, each one connected to the memorial stone by a line of moving grass. Unmarked graves, the ones they'd buried people in before anyone thought to keep records, before anyone cared enough to mark the spots where human beings had been planted like seeds that would never grow. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I jerked my head toward it, but there was nothing there, just the empty field, the skeletal trees, the pale sky. But I'd seen something, a figure, human-shaped but wrong somehow, too tall or too thin or moving in a way that didn't match normal joint articulation. My hands were shaking. I pushed myself up to standing, never taking my eyes off the memorial, and started backing away again. The grass moved under my feet, bending away as if repelled by my steps. Every blade I touched went flat, pressing itself to the earth as if trying to avoid contact. The sound came a third time, and this time I understood part of it. One word, clear and distinct among the garbled syllables. Remember. My legs finally unlocked. I turned and ran. The parking lot seemed miles away, though I knew it was only a quarter mile. My lungs burned. My legs felt heavy, fighting against air that had grown thick and resistant. Behind me I heard nothing. No footsteps, no pursuit. But the sense of being followed was overwhelming, a pressure against my back like hands about to grab my shoulders. I reached my car and fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before getting the door open. As I slammed it shut and jammed the key into the ignition, I made the mistake of looking back toward the memorial. The man in the brown jacket was standing there again. He was facing the stone, completely still, and even from this distance, I could see the wrongness in his posture, too rigid, too straight, like a mannequin. As I watched, his head began to turn toward me, rotating with smooth, mechanical precision that no neck should allow. I didn't wait to see his face. The engine turned over and I reversed out of the spot with enough force to spray gravel. The drive back to Philadelphia was a blur. I don't remember most of it, just flashes of highway, of checking the rearview mirror obsessively, of the way every shadow seemed to hold human shapes. That was 6 days ago. Since then, I've been hearing the sound in other places. In my apartment at night, threading through my skull while I lie awake. In the grocery store, sliding between my ears while I reach for milk. On the subway platform, cutting through the rumble of approaching trains. It lasts 2 seconds each time. The same wet syllables, the same electrical hiss. Sometimes I catch words. Remember, remember, witness. Yesterday I drove back to Penhurst. I don't know why. Some compulsion I couldn't name, a hook in my brain pulling me back. I told myself I was going to prove it had been nothing, just stress and suggestion and the power of place. The memorial was the same black granite, the same carved names. The field was empty except for one other car in the lot, a brown sedan that looked familiar though I couldn't place why. I walked to the stone, read the names, ran my fingers over the carved letters, feeling the grooves. The sound didn't come. The grass didn't move. Everything was normal, quiet, empty. Just a memorial in an empty field on a gray November afternoon. But here's what I can't explain. What keeps me awake now even though the sound has stopped. When I got back to my car, there was dirt under my fingernails. Dark, loamy soil packed deep beneath each nail. the kind you'd get from digging, from clawing at earth. My hands were clean when I'd arrived. I'm certain of it. I'd washed them before I left, checked them in the rearview mirror, and in my jacket pocket, I found something that shouldn't be there. A small, smooth stone, polished black granite. On one side, carved in letters so tiny I need a magnifying glass to read them, is a name I don't recognize. Beneath the name is a date. Yesterday's date. I've been trying to convince myself I picked it up without thinking, some fragment from the memorial that had broken off. But memorial stones don't break into pocket-sized pieces, and they don't carve themselves with future dates. Last night I heard the sound again, but this time it didn't travel from ear to ear. This time it came from inside my own throat, syllables I couldn't control forcing their way up and out. My roommate heard it through the wall. He knocked, asked if I was okay, said I'd been talking in my sleep. I asked him what I'd said. He looked at me strangely, with that same expression the man in the brown jacket had worn. Eyebrows up, mouth slightly open, head tilted. Then he recited it back to me, perfect phonetic recreation of the wet, garbled syllables I'd first heard in the field. He asked me what it meant. I told him I didn't know. But I did know. Somewhere deep in the part of my brain that deals with pattern recognition and survival instinct, I knew exactly what it meant. I just don't know if I'm being called to remember or being remembered. The distinction, I'm starting to realize, might not matter. The grass in the planters outside my building has started moving against the wind. Story 8. The fluorescent lights in the St. Paul Community Center hum a frequency that lives somewhere between hearing and feeling. I've worked the night shift here for 8 months now, and I've learned that sound, that specific pitch, marks the threshold between the building's day self and whatever it becomes after the last class empties out at 9 p.m. Tonight, like every night, I arrive at 10:15. The parking lot stretches empty except for my car and the sodium vapor lights that turn everything the color of old photographs. Inside, the building settles around me with creaks and sighs that I've stopped trying to attribute to thermal contraction or settling foundations. Some explanations are just words we use to make ourselves comfortable. The main corridor runs 73 paces from the entrance to the emergency exit at the far end. I counted once during my second week, when I still believed measuring things would give me control over them. The walls are lined with framed photographs dating back to the 1950s. Community picnics, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, children who are now grandparents or gone. Their black and white faces watch me pass, and sometimes I wonder if they see what I've started seeing, or what started seeing me. I stop at the security desk, set down my thermos and bag, and speak to the empty lobby. Good evening. Thank you for your help. The words feel foolish in my mouth. The same foolishness I'd feel leaving milk out for house spirits or throwing salt over my shoulder. But routines matter here, especially the ones that keep things orderly. The air conditioning kicks on at 10:47 every night. I've timed it, watched it, waited for variation. There is none. But at 10:46, without fail, I hear my name. Not shouted, not whispered, something in between. A conversational tone from someone standing just close enough that you'd turn to respond. Except there's never anyone there. The sound comes from everywhere and nowhere, riding on the edge of the ventilation system's white noise, and it always says the same thing. My name, followed by a pause, as if waiting for acknowledgement I've learned not to give. Tonight I'm reviewing maintenance logs when it happens. James. The syllables arrive soft and certain. My pen stops moving. I don't look up. Looking up changed nothing the first 30 times, and now it feels like breaking protocol. Instead, I continue writing, noting that the third-floor bathroom needs new fixtures, and exactly 1 minute later, the air conditioning rumbles to life with its familiar metallic groan. I've told myself it's auditory pareidolia, the brain's desperate pattern-seeking finding my name in random noise. But pareidolia doesn't explain why it only happens at 10:46. It doesn't explain why it stopped calling my name the week I started saying thank you. The first floor is my domain, checking locks, ensuring coffee makers are off, straightening chairs in the multi-purpose room. The building is too large for one person to monitor properly, but the budget allows for one overnight security guard, and that's me. The higher floors are supposed to be my responsibility too, but I've developed a system. I check the stairwell doors, locked from the inside, and tell myself that's sufficient. What happens on floors 2 and 3 can stay on floors 2 and 3. Except tonight, one of the stairwell doors is propped open. I stand in the corridor, staring at the metal door that should be flush with its frame. Instead, a rubber doorstop holds it at a 45-degree angle. I didn't leave it this way. The cleaning crew leaves at 8 p.m. No one else has keys. The logical explanation trembles at the edge of my thoughts, but logic has been negotiable here for months. I could close the door, remove the wedge, pretend I never saw it. But the open doorway breathes a different temperature air into the corridor, and ignoring it feels like breaking another rule, one I don't fully understand but know better than to violate. I climb the stairs. The second floor is darker than it should be. Half the hallway lights are out, though they were functioning yesterday. The emergency exit signs cast everything in red-tinged shadow, and the photographs here are different, newer, color images from the 1980s and 90s. Bowling leagues, dance classes, a Christmas party where everyone wears sweaters with geometric patterns. Something has been moved. The water fountain near the women's bathroom, an old porcelain fixture mounted at chest height, has a coffee cup on top of it, not beside it. On top, balanced on the curved surface where no cup should reasonably stay balanced. I stop walking. The cup is from the first floor break room. I recognize the chipped rim. No one should be able to reach that fountain's top without a stepladder. Even I would need to stretch. But there it sits, perfectly centered, as if placed by someone with casual access to spaces I can't reach. I leave it there. The third floor is where things get complicated. I've only been up here twice. Once during orientation, once when a pipe burst and I needed to shut off the water main. Both times I felt watched in a way that made my skin prickle and my thoughts scatter. The floor isn't abandoned exactly. There are offices, storage rooms, a small library that used to serve as a reading room. But no one uses this space anymore. When I asked my supervisor why, he just shrugged and said something about budget reallocations. Tonight, I'm not planning to go to the third floor, but when I reach the second floor landing and look up the next flight of stairs, I see light coming from above. Not the emergency exit sign. This is warmer, yellower, incandescent light from an era before this building switched to fluorescence. My feet make the decision before my brain can intervene. Up the stairs, toward the light, toward whatever's waiting. The third floor corridor should be dark, should be empty. Instead, one of the office doors stands open, spilling that impossible warm light across the hallway floor. The office is exactly as I remember from my first visit. Wooden desk, filing cabinets, a coat rack in the corner. But the desk lamp is on, and sitting on the desk's surface, arranged in a neat row, are 5 fire extinguishers. I recognize them. They're the ones that should be distributed throughout the building, 1 per floor, specific types for specific fire classes. The building inspector came last month and marked their locations on the safety diagram, complaining that they'd been moved from their regulation positions. I'd found them, one by one, over subsequent weeks, always a few feet away from where they belonged, always closer to where I'd actually need them if something went wrong. Someone has collected them all here, displayed them, left them for me to find. The air in the office tastes old, preserved, like opening a jar that's been sealed for decades. I step inside, and the temperature drops 10 degrees. My breath doesn't quite mist, but I feel the cold settle in my lungs, heavy and wrong. The desk lamp illuminates a logbook I don't remember seeing before, open to a page dated November 1983. The entries are shift reports, night security shift reports. The handwriting is precise, almost mechanical, noting the same routine I follow. Lock checks, equipment verification, incident reports. But as I scan down the page, the entries change. They become observations, complaints, concerns. Heard footsteps on second floor. Building should be empty. Items rearranged in break room. No evidence of entry. Something watches from the third floor offices. Can feel its attention. The final entry, dated November 17th, 1983, reads simply, "Arrangement made. Will continue duties as required." My hands shake as I turn the page. The next date is today's, and the handwriting is mine. Evening checks completed. Gentlemen cooperative. Extinguishers relocated as needed. I don't remember writing this. I've never seen this logbook. But that's my handwriting, my way of abbreviating completed, my habit of underlining dates. The entry describes tonight's shift, events that haven't fully happened yet, written in past tense. I back away from the desk. The extinguishers watch me with their silent red cylinders, and I understand suddenly why they're here. Not a threat, a gift, a demonstration of capability. The same capability that moves coffee cups onto surfaces they shouldn't reach, that maintains this building according to standards I'm only beginning to understand. The light in the office flickers, not like failing electricity, more like someone briefly interrupting the beam, passing between the bulb and my eyes. The cold intensifies, and I hear, for the first time since I started this job, a sound I can't dismiss as building mechanics or auditory hallucination. Footsteps, deliberate, measured, the sound of dress shoes on linoleum. They come from the hallway, approaching the office, and they have weight. These aren't the phantom sounds I've learned to ignore. These steps compress the floor, displace air, exist in the physical world with undeniable presence. I press myself against the filing cabinet, every muscle locked. The footsteps reach the doorway. Stop. The office lamp flickers again, and in that strobing light, I see something that my mind refuses to process coherently. Not invisible, not exactly. More like a space where reality has different density, where the air holds a shape that suggests shoulders, a head, the outline of someone who exists according to rules I don't have access to. The shape moves past me, approaches the desk, and I hear, feel, sense, a presence reviewing the logbook. The pages turn without hands. A sound emerges that might be satisfaction, or might be my sanity finally cracking under 8 months of pretending this is normal. Then the shape turns toward me. I can't see eyes, can't see a face. But I feel attention focus on me with the weight of a physical touch, and in that moment, I understand that I've been seen all along. Every thank you I've murmured to empty lobbies. Every time I've pretended not to notice objects rearranged. Every extinguisher found exactly where I needed it, moved by hands I couldn't see. We've had an arrangement. I just didn't know I'd agreed to it. The cold begins to recede. The footsteps move toward the door, pause, then continue down the hallway toward the stairs. The office lamp stays on, but the wrongness in the air dissipates like smoke. I'm alone again, or as alone as I ever am in this building. I leave the extinguishers where they are. Some gifts shouldn't be redistributed. Walking down to the second floor, then the first. I notice things I've been trained not to see. The coffee cup I left in the break room this morning, now washed and placed in the exact center of the counter. The security log, updated in handwriting that's almost but not quite mine. The emergency exit door on the first floor, which I distinctly remember checking and finding locked, now showing the green indicator light that means it's been tested and approved. My shift ends at 6 a.m. I complete my rounds, noting everything in the logbook that may or may not be the same logbook I found upstairs. When I write my final entry, night shift completed, no incidents to report, the words feel like a lie and a truth simultaneously. As I prepare to leave, I stop at the security desk. The building is beginning its transformation back into its day self. Soon the early morning yoga class will arrive, then the senior breakfast club, then the endless parade of community activities that make this place feel normal and alive. But I know what it becomes after they leave. I know who maintains order in the empty hours, and as I head toward the exit, I speak to the silent lobby one more time. Thank you for your help. See you tonight. The air conditioning isn't scheduled to run for another 3 hours, but somewhere in the building's mechanical depths, I hear the familiar groan of the system coming to life, and underneath it, barely audible, something that might be my name spoken in acknowledgement. Or it might be nothing at all. I step out into the parking lot. Dawn is still an hour away, and the sodium vapor lights paint everything in shades of amber and shadow. My car waits where I left it, but when I unlock the door, I find something on the driver's seat that wasn't there before. A fire extinguisher. The right type for automotive fires, positioned exactly where I'd need it. I place it in the trunk, start the engine, and drive home through streets that are just beginning to wake. In 8 hours, I'll return for another shift. I'll say thank you to the empty lobby. I'll pretend not to notice when objects move themselves. And I'll continue maintaining my end of an arrangement I never consciously made, but can't imagine breaking. Because some routines matter. Some thank yous get answered. And some buildings are never as empty as they appear. The question I can't answer, the one that follows me home and waits in my bedroom while I try to sleep, is whether I'm helping something that needs help, or whether I'm the one being helped. Whether the gentleman in the building is a presence I've learned to coexist with, or whether I've become the presence, writing logbooks in handwriting I don't recognize, moving through floors I don't remember visiting, maintaining duties that extend beyond my shift and possibly beyond my understanding. When I close my eyes, I sometimes see that office on the 3rd floor, that logbook open to dates I haven't lived yet, entries in my handwriting describing nights I haven't worked, and I wonder if the arrangement I've made is keeping something in the building or keeping me from leaving it. I wonder if there's a difference anymore. Story 9. And the first time I heard it, I was 3 days into my lease. The footsteps came from the end of the hallway, slow, deliberate, carrying weight that made the floorboards groan in protest. Each step landed with the certainty of someone who belonged there, someone who knew exactly where they were going. I froze on my couch, book forgotten in my lap, listening as they approached. The sound grew closer, louder, until they stopped directly outside my bedroom door. I waited for a knock, for a voice, for anything. The silence that followed pressed against the door like something physical, something that breathed and waited and watched. I counted to 60, then to 60 again, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. When I finally stood and crossed to the door, my hand trembled on the doorknob. The metal felt too cold, the kind of cold that shouldn't exist in a heated apartment in October. I yanked it open. The hallway stretched empty before me, lit by the same flickering bulb that had been there when I moved in. Dust motes drifted in the stale air. The silence now felt normal, ordinary, just the quiet hum of an old building settling into night. I checked the front door. Locked, chain latched. I even looked out the peephole at the empty exterior hallway beyond, where nothing moved except the emergency exit sign's slow pulse of red light. That night, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Old buildings make noise. The woman in 4B probably walked past my door on her way to the stairwell. Simple, rational. I went to bed and dreamed of footsteps that circled my room in ever-tightening spirals. It happened again, 3 nights later. This time I was brushing my teeth, fluoride foam bitter on my tongue, when the footsteps began. Same measured pace, same weight, same impossible silence when they reached my bedroom door. I spat into the sink and stood there, toothbrush dripping, watching the bathroom mirror fog with my own panicked breathing. The silence stretched. I turned off the faucet, straining to hear anything. A cough, a shuffle, the rustle of clothing. Nothing. Just that thick, waiting quiet that seemed to absorb all sound into itself. When I emerged from the bathroom, I walked straight to the bedroom door and flung it open immediately, hoping to catch whoever was playing this sick game. The hallway gaped empty, but this time I noticed something. The floorboard directly in front of my door, the one that usually creaked when I stepped on it in the morning, looked different, not in any way I could articulate. The wood grain seemed darker, or maybe just more defined, as if something had pressed into it recently. I knelt down and touched it. The wood felt warm. I began keeping track after that, noting each occurrence in my phone: date, time, duration of the footsteps, length of the silence that followed. The pattern made no sense. Sometimes 3 nights would pass without incident. Other times it happened twice in one day, once at 3:47 a.m., once at noon while I worked from home. The intervals were random, chaotic, but the footsteps themselves never varied. Same pace, same weight, same stopping point. I mentioned it to the building manager, a weathered man named Orrin who always smelled faintly of cigarettes and motor oil. He listened with the patience of someone who'd heard every complaint imaginable, then asked if I wanted him to check the hallway. We walked it together, his keys jangling at his hip, while he pointed out that the apartment at the far end, where the footsteps seemed to originate, had been vacant for 8 months. Before that, an elderly veteran had lived there. Quiet man, kept to himself, died in his sleep. The way Orrin said it made my skin prickle. I asked how the man had died exactly. Orrin shrugged, said the landlord found him in bed, peaceful as could be. Natural causes. Then he asked if I wanted to see the apartment. Maybe it would ease my mind to see it empty. I declined. Weeks passed, and the footsteps became part of my routine. I learned to anticipate them, though I could never predict them. I stopped opening the door immediately, instead waiting through the silence, counting the seconds. The longest silence lasted 11 minutes and 43 seconds. I stood on the other side with my ear pressed to the wood, listening so intently my head throbbed. No breathing, no movement, just that suffocating quiet, as if the hallway itself was holding its breath. During the day, I tried to rationalize it. Acoustic anomalies, sound traveling through the building's old pipes and radiators. Someone on another floor whose footsteps echoed down through the structure in ways that seemed to come from my hallway. I researched architectural acoustics, read about how buildings can channel sound in unexpected ways, how the human brain is wired to find patterns and assign meaning where none exists. But none of that explained the warmth of the floorboard, or the way the silence felt occupied. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked. It didn't help. The footsteps still came, still stopped outside, and now I had an extra barrier between me and answers. Some nights I'd lie in bed, staring at the strip of light under my door, watching for shadows, feet, anything. The light never changed, but I could feel something there, could sense its presence with the same certainty I'd sense someone standing behind me in an otherwise empty room. My work began to suffer. I'd zone out during video calls, listening for footsteps beneath my colleagues' voices. My boss asked if everything was okay, said I seemed distracted. I told him I was fine, just adjusting to the new place. He suggested I get out more, meet people, not let myself get isolated. Good advice that I didn't take. Instead, I started watching the hallway through my peephole. Hours would pass while I stood there, eye pressed to the glass, waiting. My back ached, my vision blurred, but I needed to see who, or what, was walking that hallway. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I never saw anything. But twice while I watched, the footsteps came. I saw nothing in the peephole's fisheye view, just the empty hallway and that flickering bulb. But I heard them clear as day. Step, 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 growing closer, and then the silence. So close I could have reached out and touched it if not for the door between us. The second time this happened, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the peephole's distorted reflection, I could see my own door from the hallway's perspective. And for just a moment, less than a second, I saw the doorknob turn. Not from my side, from the outside. I jerked back, heart hammering, and stared at the knob. It sat motionless now, brass gleaming dully in the apartment's light. I must have imagined it. The peephole distorts everything, makes straight lines curve, makes distances impossible to judge. But my hand still shook when I reached out to touch the knob. It felt cold again, that same unnatural cold. The change came on a Thursday in November. I was eating dinner at my small kitchen table, some microwaved pasta that tasted like cardboard. When the footsteps began, same as always, I set down my fork and waited, tracking the sound as it approached. Step, 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 stop. The silence descended. I counted to 60, then to 60 again. When I reached 120, something new happened. The footsteps continued, but they were moving away now, back down the hallway, retracing the exact path they'd come from. The same boards creaked in reverse order, like a recording played backward. I sat frozen, pasta congealing on my plate, listening as the footsteps receded toward the vacant apartment at the hall's end. They faded, stopped. The building settled into its normal nighttime sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic, pipes groaning behind walls. I waited for them to come back. They didn't, not that night. But the next evening they did it again. Approached, stopped, silence, then retreated along the same path. And again, the night after that. Same pattern, same timing, like a routine being practiced to perfection. I couldn't sleep. The not knowing gnawed at me worse than the fear. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to break free from this cycle of dread and confusion. So I decided to do something reckless. The next time the footsteps came, I would follow them back. I prepared like someone preparing for war. Waited by my door, phone in hand, recording app ready. When the footsteps began that Saturday night, I tracked them with every sense I had. They approached, stopped outside my door. The silence fell, thick and heavy. I forced myself to wait, counted to 30. The footsteps resumed their retreat, and I quietly unlocked my door, eased it open, and stepped into the hallway. Nothing. Empty in both directions. But I could still hear them. Faint now, but unmistakable, moving away toward the vacant apartment. I followed, my bare feet silent on the old floorboards, keeping several yards back. The footsteps maintained their steady pace, never quickening, never slowing. They led me to apartment 4A, the one Oren had mentioned, and stopped at its door. I stopped too, pressing myself against the wall, barely breathing. The door to 4A looked like all the others, scuffed white paint, brass number, standard lock. But something about it felt wrong, felt final, like looking at a door I was never meant to open. The silence that followed wasn't like the one outside my bedroom. This was different, deeper. It pulled at something inside me, a tugging sensation in my chest that made me want to run and stay simultaneously. I stared at that door and felt certain, absolutely certain, that something on the other side was staring back. My phone was still recording. I lifted it, aimed the camera at the door, and watched the screen. The hallway looked normal through the camera, mundane and boring. Just an empty corridor in a cheap apartment building. But when I lowered the phone and looked with my own eyes, I saw it. The gap beneath the door was dark. Not shadow dark. Not unlit room dark. A darkness that seemed to absorb light, that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. And then, so quietly I almost missed it, I heard breathing. Not human breathing. Something slower, deeper, like lungs the size of rooms drawing air in and out. The door trembled slightly with each breath, the wood grain seeming to ripple and flow. I backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run, but terrified that any sudden movement would draw attention. The breathing stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard the doorknob begin to turn from the inside. I ran. Didn't think, didn't look back, just sprinted down the hallway to my apartment and slammed the door behind me. I engaged both locks, the chain, braced my back against the wood and waited for footsteps to follow. For knocking, for that breathing sound to seep under my door. Nothing came. The building remained quiet. Normal. After an hour, my heart rate finally slowed. I checked my phone recording, hands still shaking. The audio was blank, not silent, blank, as if those minutes had been cut from existence. The video showed me walking down an empty hallway, stopping at nothing, staring at a normal door, then running. No footsteps, no breathing. Just me, alone, looking increasingly unhinged. I tried to leave after that. Called my old roommate back in Portland. asked if I could crash on his couch for a while. He heard something in my voice that worried him, asked what was wrong. I couldn't explain. How do you tell someone that your apartment is haunted by footsteps that might not exist? That you're being stalked by silence? He said I could come anytime. I started packing that night, but when I woke up the next morning, I couldn't remember where I'd put my car keys. Searched everywhere, drawers, coat pockets, under cushions. Gone. My spare set had vanished too. I told myself I'd misplaced them, that stress was making me forgetful. But I knew. Something didn't want me to leave. The footsteps changed after that night. Now they came multiple times a day, always following the same pattern. Approach, stop, retreat. Sometimes they'd repeat the cycle 3 or 4 times in an hour. I stopped answering work emails, stopped eating regular meals. I spent hours standing in my hallway, trying to catch them in the act, trying to see what I knew was there. The floorboard outside my bedroom began to show wear. A depression formed exactly where the footsteps stopped, as if something had stood there thousands of times, gradually pressing the wood into submission. I measured it with a ruler, a 1/4 inch deep in the center, edges perfectly circular. When I touched it, the wood was always warm. I started finding other evidence. Dust patterns in the hallway that shouldn't exist. Footprint shapes that appeared overnight and vanished by morning. The smell of tobacco smoke that drifted from the vacant apartment, even though no one had smoked there in months. Scratching sounds inside my walls that moved with purpose, tracking my movements from room to room. The worst part was the waiting. Every silence felt loaded now, pregnant with potential. I'd freeze mid-action, making coffee, reading, showering, struck by the certainty that something was about to happen. The tension wound tighter each day, a spring compressed beyond its limits, ready to snap. My reflection started looking wrong. Not dramatically. I didn't see monsters or ghosts, but in mirrors, in windows, in the black screen of my turned-off television, I'd catch glimpses of myself standing slightly different than I remembered standing, facing the wrong direction, positioned in parts of rooms I hadn't entered. When I'd turn to look, everything would be normal, but the image would linger in my peripheral vision, that other version of me, watching. I called Oren again, demanded he let me into 4A, told him I needed to see it, needed to prove to myself it was empty. He hesitated, said he'd have to check with the landlord, that there were liability issues. I almost grabbed him by his flannel collar and shook him, but managed to keep my composure. He promised to call me back. He never did. It's been 6 weeks since that night in the hallway. The footsteps come constantly now, every few hours, day and night. I've stopped sleeping in my bedroom, instead curling up on the couch where I can see both the front door and the hallway entrance. My boss fired me last week, told me I'd missed too many deadlines, wasn't responding to messages. He was right. I couldn't explain that I was busy documenting a haunting that might only exist in my head. The pattern has evolved. Now, after the footsteps retreat to 4A, I can hear them continue inside that apartment. They pace back and forth, wall to wall, for hours. Sometimes I press my ear to the wall we share and listen to them moving through rooms that mirror my own. Kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, then back to the front door, where the cycle begins again. I tried to leave twice more. Both times I made it as far as the building's front entrance before a wave of vertigo hit me so hard I collapsed. Woke up in my apartment hours later with no memory of how I got back. The door was locked from the inside. The chain latched. Yesterday, I found a note slipped under my door. No envelope, just a piece of aged paper with 2 words written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Come home. I don't know what it means. This is my home. I signed a year-long lease. My furniture is here, my clothes, my whole life. But the note sits on my kitchen counter now, those 2 words growing heavier with each reading. Tonight, the footsteps are different. They're faster, urgent. They approach my bedroom door, and the silence lasts only seconds before they retreat, only to immediately return. Back and forth, like something pacing in agitation or excitement. I'm writing this on my laptop, my last chance to document what's happening before I do what I know I'm going to do. Because the truth is settling over me like a heavy blanket. This was never random. The footsteps were never trying to scare me away. They were trying to lead me somewhere. The floorboard outside my bedroom isn't just worn anymore. It's carved. I got down on my hands and knees this afternoon and traced the grooves with my fingers. Letters, words, a message worn into the wood by thousands of repetitions. You were always here. My keys appeared this morning, sitting on the kitchen counter where I've looked 100 times. I could leave now, get in my car and drive until Boise is a dot in my rearview mirror. But I won't. I know that now. I think I've always known. Because when I look at my reflection these days, the other version of me isn't watching anymore. It's waiting. And it's standing in the hallway outside apartment 4A, hand on the doorknob, patient as stone. The footsteps are at my bedroom door again. They've stopped. The silence presses against the wood, and I can feel it calling to me, pulling at something deep in my chest that recognizes it the way you might recognize a forgotten song from childhood. I'm going to open the door now. Not my bedroom door. I think I'm done with that one. I'm going to walk down the hallway to 4A, where the footsteps always end and begin, where something has been waiting, practicing its path between there and here, wearing grooves into reality itself. I don't know what I'll find. Part of me suspects I've been there before, in some life or dream I can't quite remember. Another part thinks I'll find nothing, just an empty apartment and proof of my own unraveling mind. But the deepest part of me, the part that's been listening to those footsteps for weeks, knows the truth. I'm not discovering something new. I'm remembering something old, something that's been calling me back to a place I never really left. The doorknob to 4A is turning from the inside again. I can hear it from here, that soft metallic click. This time I'm not going to run. This time I'm going home. Story 10. The heat in Baton Rouge doesn't apologize. It sits on your chest like a living thing, thick and patient, waiting for you to acknowledge it. That June night, the air conditioning had given up around midnight, and I'd opened every window in the house, hoping for even the ghost of a breeze. The screen door at the front, the one I'd been meaning to tighten for weeks, hung loose on its hinges, barely latched. When it slammed shut, the sound cut through the humid silence like a gunshot. I jerked upright in bed, heart hammering against my ribs. Beside me, my partner stirred but didn't wake. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m. in angry red numbers. Outside, nothing moved. No wind, no passing car. No reasonable explanation for why that door would slam with such violence on a night so still. The air itself seemed to be holding its breath. Then came the smell. It crept under the bedroom door first. Sweet and cloying. The kind of floral arrangement you send when words fail you. Funeral flowers. The scent was so intense it made my sinuses ache. So thick I could almost taste it coating the back of my throat. Lilies, maybe. Gardenias. Something white and waxy that belonged in a viewing room, not drifting through a shotgun house in the middle of a Louisiana night. I got up, more disturbed by the smell than the door. The hallway stretched before me, longer than it should have been. The amber glow from the streetlight outside casting everything in sepia tones. I moved toward the front of the house, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors, and noticed how the shadows seemed to lean away from the walls, reaching toward me like curious fingers. The screen door stood perfectly still now, latched as if it had never moved. I opened it anyway, stepping onto the front porch. The sweet smell intensified out here, drowning out the usual night scents of magnolia and cut grass. My neighbor's house across the street sat dark and quiet. No cars passed. Even the insects had gone silent, as if the world had pressed pause just beyond my property line. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing felt right. I went back inside, checking the latch 3 times before returning to the bedroom. My partner had rolled over, tangled in the sheets, breathing the deep, enviable rhythm of someone who'd heard nothing. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the familiar shape in the dim light, grounding myself in something real and present. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved across the hallway behind me, visible in my peripheral vision. It was tall taller than me by at least a foot, and it moved with purpose, not the random play of headlights through windows. It blocked the amber light from the living room for just a second, maybe two, before continuing past. The silhouette suggested shoulders, a head, the general architecture of a person striding with confidence through my home at 3 a.m. I spun around. The hallway was empty. Light spilled uninterrupted from the living room. My pulse thundered in my ears, so loud I almost didn't hear the low, rumbling growl coming from the corner of the bedroom. Jasper, our retriever mix, stood rigid near the dresser, hackles raised, staring at the empty space beside the closet. The growl built in his chest, not aggressive but uncertain, the sound he made when confronted with something he couldn't categorize. Then he stopped, tilted his head, and did something I'd never seen him do before. He licked the air. Not the random tongue flop dogs do when they're hot or nervous. This was deliberate, targeted, as if he were greeting someone standing right in front of him. His tail gave a single, hesitant wag. Then he backed away, whimpering, and crawled under the bed. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the living room until dawn, every light in the house blazing, watching the hallway for shapes that didn't belong. The floral smell faded as the sun came up, replaced by the honest stink of garbage day and the coffee brewing at the house next door. By the time my partner woke up, I'd almost convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. Almost. But then there was the way Jasper wouldn't come out from under the bed. The way the house felt different in the morning light. Like a shirt you've put on inside out. Recognizable but wrong. And there was the conversation I couldn't quite bring myself to start. Because how do you say that something walked through your home in the night without sounding like you'd finally cracked? We went to a motel that evening. I made an excuse about the air conditioning, about needing a good night's sleep before an important meeting. It wasn't entirely a lie. The AC unit had died, and I did have a presentation at work. But mainly, I couldn't face another night in that house, waiting for doors to slam and shadows to walk, and my dog to greet invisible visitors with a coward's welcome. The motel room smelled like industrial cleaning products and someone else's cigarette smoke. It was perfect. We slept through the night without incident, and I woke up feeling foolish. Heat exhaustion, I told myself. Stress. The brain playing tricks when pushed too far by humidity and insomnia. We returned home the next afternoon. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. No broken windows, no signs of entry, nothing missing or disturbed. The house sat quiet in the brutal sunlight, looking smaller and more ordinary than I remembered. I did a walkthrough anyway, checking closets and behind doors, feeling progressively more ridiculous with each empty room. It was my partner who found the card. They were out back, checking to make sure we'd closed all the windows before leaving, when they called my name. I found them standing on the deck, holding a small piece of cardstock between 2 fingers, like it might burn them. The card was cream-colored, expensive stock. The kind you'd use for a wedding invitation or a sympathy note. No envelope, no marking on the outside. Someone had wedged it carefully between the deck boards, positioned so we'd see it when we stepped outside, but protected from the weather that had rolled through while we were gone. I opened it. Inside, written in careful cursive with what looked like an actual ink pen, was a single word. Until. No signature, no context, just that one word, hanging in the white space like a threat or a promise or both. My partner wanted to call the police. I said no, though I couldn't articulate why. What would we tell them? Someone left us a greeting card? There's no law against that. No menace in a single word, however unsettling the delivery. But I knew. Standing there on the deck with that card in my hand, the afternoon heat pressing down like a hand on my shoulder, I knew this was connected to the door, the smell, the shadow, the dog's strange greeting. These weren't separate incidents. They were movements in a conversation I'd only just realized I was having. The question was, with whom? That night I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bedroom. I sat up on the couch instead, telling my partner I wanted to catch up on some reading. They didn't argue, but I caught them watching me with concern before they closed the bedroom door. Jasper, for his part, refused to leave my side. He pressed against my legs as I read, trembling occasionally, his eyes fixed on the hallway. Around midnight, I heard the first footstep. It came from the back of the house, from the direction of our bedroom. A soft, deliberate pressure on the floorboards, the kind of sound a person makes when they're trying to be quiet, but the old house betrays them anyway. I held my breath, straining to hear over the hammer of my own pulse. Another step. Closer. I wanted to call out, to wake my partner, to make some noise that would shatter whatever was building in the darkness. But my throat had closed up, and something primal in my hindbrain whispered that making noise would be worse, would acknowledge something better left unacknowledged. The footsteps continued. Slow, measured, moving from the bedroom toward the living room, toward me. I counted them without meaning to. 5, 6, 7, each one impossibly loud in the thick silence. Then they stopped. I stared at the archway that separated the living room from the hallway, every muscle locked, waiting for something to step into view. The darkness there seemed denser than it should be, textured somehow, like I was looking at fabric instead of empty air. The sweet smell returned, rolling through the house in a wave. Jasper bolted. He scrambled off the couch and ran to the front door, clawing at it, whining high and desperate. The sound finally broke my paralysis. I stood up, grabbed my keys and phone, and let him out. He took off across the yard, not stopping until he reached the streetlight at the corner. I should have followed him. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, to put distance between myself and whatever occupied the space where the hallway met the living room. Instead, I turned around. Nothing there. Just the familiar archway, the family photos on the wall, the stack of mail on the side table, empty and ordinary and wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. I walked to the bedroom. My partner was sitting up in bed, eyes unfocused, still caught somewhere between sleep and waking. "Did you hear that?" I asked. They blinked at me, confused. "Hear what?" "The footsteps. I stopped. How did they sleep through all of that? The footsteps had been loud enough to wake the dead, clear enough that I'd counted each one. Unless they hadn't been loud at all. Unless I was the only one who could hear them. The thought settled in my stomach like ice water. I spent the rest of the night in my car, parked in the driveway with the doors locked and the windows up despite the heat. Jasper had eventually slunk back, and he curled up in the passenger seat, still trembling. Through the windshield, I watched our house. The lights I'd left on created yellow squares in the darkness. Nothing moved behind them. Nothing that I could see anyway. But I felt watched. That certainty sat heavy on my shoulders, undeniable as the humidity. Whatever had left that card, whatever walked my hallway and made my dog whimper in recognition, it knew I was out here. It was waiting with infinite patience for me to come back inside. As the sky began to lighten, I noticed something I'd missed before. There were fingerprints on the outside of my car window. On the driver's side, right next to where my head had been resting. Large prints, pressed against the glass from the outside. I hadn't heard anyone approach. Jasper hadn't barked. I leaned forward slowly, examining the marks. They were smudged, indistinct, but definitely there. Definitely recent. And positioned in such a way that whoever made them had been standing right beside my door, looking down at me while I sat there, staring at my house, watching me watch. The sun came up red and angry, burning off the night's mysteries without offering any answers. I went inside, showered, made coffee, went through all the motions of a normal morning while my partner got ready for work. We didn't talk about the night before. What was there to say? But as they kissed me goodbye at the door, they paused. "You smell like flowers," they said, wrinkling their nose. "Too sweet, like a..." They didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I stood at the window and watched them drive away, and I thought about the card wedged between the deck boards, until... Not goodbye. Not a warning. A promise of return. And I realized, with a clarity that made my hands shake, that whatever this was, hallucination, haunting, breakdown, it wasn't finished with me. Maybe it had been here all along, living in the spaces between the walls, walking the hallway while I slept. Maybe I'd only just learned to see it. Or maybe I'd been seeing it all along and only now stopped pretending I hadn't. The screen door moved in a breeze that didn't exist, opening just an inch before settling back against the frame. From somewhere in the house, I heard what might have been a footstep, or might have been the old wood settling. I didn't go to check. I stood at that window, breathing in the scent of funeral flowers that now seemed to rise from my own skin, and I waited for whatever comes after until... Story 11. The house in Denver breathes when I don't. I discovered this 3 weeks after moving in, standing motionless in the kitchen at 2:47 a.m., holding my breath to better hear the footsteps overhead. In that silence, my lungs burning, my heartbeat thundering in my ears, I felt it. A subtle expansion of the walls, a gentle creaking of floorboards in rhythm, as though the entire structure inhaled while I could not. When I finally gasped for air, the house seemed to exhale with me. I tell myself these are the sounds of an old building settling. The realtor mentioned it was built in 1923, and century-old homes have their quirks. But quirks don't explain the pattern. Quirks don't explain the deliberate quality of what happens here. When I'm downstairs, I hear them above. Footfalls crossing from the bedroom to the hallway, then back again. Always the same route. The rhythm is too regular, too measured to be the random groaning of old wood. I've memorized it now. 7 steps toward the hallway, a pause of exactly 4 seconds, then 7 steps back. When I climb the stairs to investigate, the sounds migrate below me. I'll stand in the upstairs hallway, barely breathing, and hear that same 7-step pattern directly beneath my feet, as though someone is pacing the first-floor hallway in perfect synchronization with my position. The house is always 1 floor ahead of me, or 1 floor behind. I can't decide which is worse. I work from home now, a software consultant for firms on the East Coast. The 3-hour time difference means I'm often awake when Denver sleeps, my laptop screen the only light in the house at ungodly hours. I used to enjoy the solitude. Used to. Last Tuesday, I returned from a 4-day trip to Phoenix. I'd been meticulous before leaving. Every window locked, every door checked twice, the thermostat set to 62 degrees. I have a system. Obsessive maybe, but necessary. I photograph each window with my phone, showing the lock engaged, then take a second photo of the entire room for context. I do the same with the doors. My camera roll is full of these redundant images, time-stamped and geotagged. When I came home, the window in the spare bedroom was open, not wide open, just unlatched, resting against the frame, a 2-inch gap letting in the October cold. I checked my photos. The window had been locked. The image showed it clearly. The brass latch turned horizontal, secured. Yet there it was, open. The white curtain drifting in the breeze like a beckoning hand. I checked the photos from previous trips. 3 other instances. The bathroom window after my weekend in Santa Fe. The living room window after 2 nights in Boulder. Each time, open. Each time, impossible. The attic access haunts me more than it should. It's in my bedroom closet. A simple pull-down hatch with a folding ladder. The first time I opened it, the ladder's hinges shrieked so loudly I was certain the neighbors heard. Every step groaned. Any movement up there would be impossible to hide. The sound would reverberate through the entire house. I went up once, just once, during my first week here. The attic was exactly what you'd expect. Dusty boxes left by previous owners, ancient insulation, bare bulbs on pull chains. Nothing remarkable, nothing frightening. But sometimes late at night, I hear sounds from above my bedroom. Not the footsteps, those are different, those migrate. These are smaller sounds, a scraping, the whisper of cardboard sliding across wood, the creak of someone shifting their weight. I've stood in my closet at 3 a.m., staring up at that hatch, knowing that if someone were up there, if something were up there, the ladder would have announced its descent. Those hinges don't lie, they can't be silent. And yet the sounds continue. Scrape, slide, creak. I haven't gone back up. I tell myself it's because there's nothing to see. But the truth sits heavier. I'm afraid of what I might find. Or worse, what might find me. The paper seals were my attempt at sanity. I bought a package of tamper-evident security tape from a locksmith supply store, the kind that tears if you try to remove it, leaving obvious evidence of tampering. I cut strips and placed them across every window in the house, photographing each one. If the windows opened, the seals would break. Simple, empirical, something I could measure. 2 nights later, I found the first one. The kitchen window seal was cut. Not torn, cut. Sliced cleanly down the middle with something sharp enough to leave the 2 halves hanging, still adhered to the glass and frame, but separated by a hairline gap. The edges were too clean, too precise. I held my phone's flashlight to the cut and saw no fraying, no tearing. It looked like someone had taken a razor blade and drawn it down the center in one smooth motion. The second one appeared 3 days after that. Bathroom window, same result. Surgical precision. The 2 halves dangled like a torn veil, perfectly aligned, mocking my efforts at documentation. I replaced them. They were cut again. I installed them on the inside and outside of the windows, double sealed. Both layers were severed, inside and outside. The cuts aligned so perfectly they seemed to have been done simultaneously. I stopped replacing them after that. My brother called last week. He's in California, managing a restaurant in San Diego, and we don't talk often. He wanted to know how I was settling into the new place. I found myself editing as I spoke, carefully curating what I shared. The house is great. Quiet neighborhood. Good bones. All true statements, technically. I didn't mention the footsteps. Didn't mention the windows. Didn't mention that I've started sleeping with my bedroom door locked from the inside, or that I've taken to leaving lights on in rooms I'm not occupying, or that I've begun talking to myself just to fill the silence with a voice I recognize as human. He asked if I was eating well, sleeping enough. I lied about both. The pattern changed last night. I was in the living room, laptop open, half watching a film while pretending to work on a project proposal. The footsteps began overhead. 7 steps, pause, 7 steps back. Routine, expected. I'd learned to tune them out, the way you learn to ignore traffic noise or a ticking clock. Then they stopped. Complete silence. The house seemed to hold its breath again, and this time I held mine with it. Seconds passed. 10, 20, 30. My hands hovered over the keyboard, fingers frozen mid-sentence. The silence was worse than the sounds. In the silence, possibilities multiplied. In the silence, anything could be happening. Then I heard it. A single footstep on the stairs. Not upstairs, not downstairs. On the staircase itself. One deliberate step, descending. The 3rd stair from the top. I know its particular creak, have memorized the acoustic signature of every board in this house. Another step. 4th from the top. Then the 5th. I couldn't move. My body understood something my mind refused to accept. Whatever was descending those stairs was coming toward me, and this time it wasn't staying 1 floor away. This time, the pattern was breaking. The footsteps stopped on the landing. I could see the staircase from where I sat, just the bottom few steps in the corner where they turned. Empty, silent, but I felt observed, the way you feel a gaze on the back of your neck, the way prey animals sense a predator they cannot see. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe. Or hours. Time felt negotiable. Eventually, I forced myself to stand, to walk to the stairs, to look up into the darkened 2nd floor. Nothing. No one. The hallway stretched empty, doors closed exactly as I'd left them. But when I returned to the living room, my laptop screen was closed. I'd left it open. I know I'd left it open. The film had been paused at 47:32. Now the screen was black, the laptop folded shut, sitting in the exact center of the coffee table as though placed there with care. I've started researching the house's history. Public records, archived newspapers, county assessor's office. The information is fragmented, full of gaps. The house has changed hands 17 times since 1923. An unusually high turnover for a residential property. Average tenure, 4 years. Some owners stayed only months. I found an obituary from 1967 for a woman who lived here. Died of natural causes. The brief text said, "No details. No age given." 3 years later, the house sold again. In 1982, a couple purchased it, and divorce proceedings appeared in the public records 11 months after. In 1995, a single owner bought it and sold it 16 months later at a loss. The pattern repeats. People don't stay. They arrive, they leave, the house remains. I found one interesting detail. In 1956, the city building inspector noted in a report that the house's acoustic properties are unusual. The inspector had been called because neighbors complained about noises. The report concluded that the sounds were likely attributable to the structure's age and the acoustic resonance of the hardwood construction. Case closed. Noises explained. Everyone satisfied. But I notice what the report doesn't say. It doesn't describe the noises. It doesn't quote the neighbors' complaints. It doesn't explain what the inspector actually heard when he visited. Tonight, I'm sitting in my car in the driveway. It's 11:43 p.m. I've been here for 2 hours, engine off, watching the house through the windshield. All the lights are on, every room, every floor. I left them that way deliberately. If something moves inside, if shadows shift, I'll see it. Nothing has moved. But as I sit here, cold seeping through the car doors, breath fogging the windows, I realize something that makes my stomach clench. I never actually see the footsteps happen. I hear them, always hear them, but I've never witnessed the movement itself. When I'm downstairs and the steps sound above, I run up the stairs. When I'm upstairs and they migrate below, I descend. But I never catch the transition. It's always just finished happening, always just relocated, always staying precisely out of sight. The house is patient. It waits for me to move first. I think about the attic ladder, those shrieking hinges, the impossibility of silent descent. And I think about the sounds I hear overhead. Soft, subtle, careful sounds that couldn't come from someone who'd climbed that ladder. Unless they were already up there. Unless they'd been up there the whole time. Unless they never used the ladder at all. My phone buzzes. A text from my brother. "You good? You sounded weird on the call." I type back, "I'm fine, just tired." Another lie. I'm collecting them now, storing them up like the photographs on my phone. Evidence of a reality I'm curating, editing, controlling. But control is an illusion here. The house decides what's real. It rearranges evidence, opens windows, cuts seals, closes laptops. It performs small miracles of impossibility while I watch, while I document, while I try to prove to myself that I'm not losing my mind. A light turns off in the upstairs bathroom. I didn't touch the switch. I'm sitting in my car. The light is off now. It was on. Now it's off. I start the engine. I should leave, drive to a hotel, call my brother back, admit that something is wrong. But where would I go? What would I say? That my house opens its own windows? That it plays hide and seek with sounds? That I feel watched by the walls, by the floors, by the air itself? They'd suggest stress, lack of sleep, maybe therapy. All reasonable recommendations, all probably correct, because the alternative means accepting that this house is aware, that it watches and waits and plays games with its occupants, that it's been doing this for 100 years and I'm just the latest player. The bathroom light turns back on. I put the car in drive, but my foot doesn't press the accelerator. Instead, I watch. The light stays on for exactly 4 seconds. I count, then turns off again. 4 seconds, the same duration as the pause in the footsteps. 7 steps, pause for 4, 7 steps back. The house is signaling me, or taunting me, or teaching me its rhythm. I turn off the engine. My hand reaches for the door handle. Some part of me, the part that still believes in rational explanations, in electrical faults and coincidence, wants to go inside and check the bathroom light switch, to find the loose wire, the faulty connection, the mundane explanation. But another part of me, growing louder each day, knows what I'll find. Nothing wrong. Nothing broken. Just a light that turns itself on and off. Just windows that open themselves. Just seals that slice themselves. Just footsteps that follow me through floors. Just sounds from an empty attic. Just a house that breathes. The bathroom light flickers. Once, twice, 3 times. Then steady again. I get out of the car. The October air is sharp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. The house stands before me, lit up like a monument, every window glowing. It looks warm, inviting, safe. I walk toward the front door, keys in hand, and as I reach for the lock, I hear it. That 7-step pattern, coming from inside. Not upstairs, not downstairs, somewhere in between, somewhere in the walls themselves, as though the house is walking toward me while standing perfectly still. The door is already unlocked. I know I locked it. I always lock it. It swings open before I can turn the key. I stand on the threshold, staring into my own hallway, my own home, my own carefully documented and photographed space. Everything looks exactly as I left it. Everything is perfectly in place. Hello? My voice sounds small, swallowed by the house's volume. No answer. Of course no answer. There's never an answer. There's only the waiting, the watching, the sense that something is always about to happen but never quite does. I step inside. The door closes behind me, not slammed, just a gentle click of the latch catching. I don't remember touching it. Maybe I did. Maybe the wind did. Maybe the house did. Overhead, the footsteps begin again. 7 steps. Pause. 7 steps back. I head toward the stairs, toward the sound, toward whatever is or isn't there. Because this is what I do now. This is what the house has trained me to do. I follow. I investigate. I document. I photograph. I seal windows and watch them open. I lock doors and find them unlocked. I chase sounds that stay 1 floor ahead of me, always ahead, always waiting. As I climb, I feel it again. That breathing sensation, that expansion and contraction. The house inhales as my foot touches the 3rd stair, the one that creaks, the one that announced those descending footsteps last night. And in that moment, ascending through my own home with all the lights blazing, I understand what the house has been trying to tell me all along. I'm not chasing anything. Nothing is 1 floor ahead of me. I'm the one being followed. The footsteps are below me now, climbing the stairs I just climbed, matching my pace exactly. 7 steps. I count them as they sound, each one on a stair I've just left. Pause for 4 seconds. I'm frozen now, halfway up, hand gripping the railing. Then 7 more steps, closing the distance. I don't turn around. I don't look back. Because if I look, I'll see the empty stairs. I'll see nothing there. And somehow, that's worse than any presence could be. The house breathes. I breathe with it. We move together, synchronized, indistinguishable. And I realize I can't remember the last time I was certain I was alone. Story 12. The fluorescent lights in my basement office hum at a frequency that makes my teeth ache. I've worked here for 3 years, and I've never gotten used to it. That persistent drone that seems to emanate not from the fixtures themselves, but from somewhere deeper in the building's bones. The Historical Society didn't mention it when they rented me this space. They didn't mention a lot of things. Providence in October wraps itself in a peculiar kind of darkness. Up on Benefit Street, the tourists love it. All those colonial houses leaning into each other like gossiping widows. The peaked roofs cutting jagged silhouettes against pewter skies. Down here, in the basement of the Thaddeus Building, built in 1847 according to the brass plaque by the entrance, the darkness is something else entirely. It's older, more patient. My office sits 3 steps below street level, with windows that offer a generous view of passing ankles and the wrought iron fence separating the building from the St. Erasmus Cemetery next door. The graves there date back to 1823, though the locals will tell you people were buried on that ground long before any official records began. Sometimes, late in the afternoon when the sun angles just right, I can see the shadows of the headstones stretching across my floor like reaching fingers. I tell myself it doesn't bother me. I tell myself a lot of things. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays are when I process the quarterly filings, and I'd been working late, the only occupied office in the building after 6. The heating system had been acting up. The whole place felt like a meat locker, so I'd kept my coat on, fingers stiff as I typed. The building settles constantly, groaning and creaking with age, but that night the sound seemed more deliberate, rhythmic, almost like footsteps on the floor above. Though I knew the building was empty, I'd gotten up to stretch, to shake off the cold that had been seeping into my joints, when I noticed the temperature had dropped even further. My breath came out in visible puffs. The fluorescent hum had changed pitch, now almost a whine, and in that altered acoustic space, I heard something else. A soft, wet sound, like fabric dragging across damp stone. The sound came from the hallway. I should have stayed in my office. Should have locked the door and called someone, anyone. But curiosity is a terrible thing, and the rational part of my brain, the part that went to graduate school and paid taxes and believed in inexplicable phenomena, insisted there had to be a mundane explanation. A leak, perhaps. A draft moving something through the corridor. The hallway was darker than it should have been. 2 of the overhead lights had gone out, leaving pools of shadow between the remaining fixtures. The wet dragging sound had stopped, but the cold remained, pressing against my skin like something physical, like a tension. That's when I saw it. 3 yards down the hall, near the emergency exit that led to the cemetery side of the building, a column of mist rose from nothing. It emerged from the concrete floor itself, swirling upward in a tight spiral, denser than any fog I'd ever seen. The fluorescent lights above caught in it, refracting into colors that had no business existing, shades of gray that hurt to look at, shadows with weight and substance. For perhaps 3 seconds, the mist held a shape. Not clearly, nothing so definite as that, but the suggestion of shoulders, of a head tilted at an angle that spoke of curiosity or confusion, of a hand, fingers spread, reaching toward me or perhaps past me, toward something I couldn't see. Then it collapsed, simply fell apart, the mist dissipating so completely that I wondered if I'd imagined it. No smell, no residue, just the hallway, dark and cold, and the sound of my own breathing harsh in my ears. I stood there for I don't know how long, waiting for my heartbeat to slow, for some rational explanation to present itself. When none came, I returned to my office, gathered my things, and left. I didn't run. I maintained that dignity, at least. But I didn't look back either. The problem started the next day. Small things at first. My computer froze during an important client call, then refused to restart for 20 minutes. An email I'd carefully crafted, triple-checked before sending, arrived at its destination without the crucial attachment I knew I'd included. The coffee maker in the break room, which had worked perfectly for months, suddenly produced nothing but lukewarm brown water that smelled faintly of rust. I could rationalize each incident individually. Technology fails, people make mistakes, coffee makers break, but taken together, especially after what I'd seen in the hallway, the cascade of small disasters took on a different quality, a purposeful quality. By Thursday, the problems had escalated. A meeting I'd confirmed 3 times was suddenly not on anyone's calendar but mine. A proposal I'd spent weeks perfecting somehow printed with pages out of order, crucial data tables replaced by blank sheets. My phone began buzzing with phantom notifications. When I checked, there was nothing there, but I could feel the vibration in my pocket, insistent and impossible to ignore. And the cold. God, the cold. My office temperature, according to the digital thermostat, held steady at 68 degrees, but my hands told a different story. I wore fingerless gloves to type, wrapped myself in layers, kept a space heater running constantly. Nothing helped. The cold came from inside, from somewhere beneath the skin, settling into my bones like infection. Friday afternoon, I found myself standing in the hallway again. Same spot, same emergency exit visible in the distance. I don't remember deciding to come here. One moment I was at my desk. The next I was in the corridor, drawn by some impulse I couldn't name. The air felt expectant, waiting. I heard myself speak, the words emerging without conscious thought. I'm giving it back. The time. Whatever I saw, whatever I took by seeing it, I'm giving it back. The silence that followed felt alive, watching, considering. I returned to my office and worked until 7, forcing myself to focus on spreadsheets and correspondence, on the mundane details of my mundane job. When I left that night, the cascade of problems seemed to have stopped. My computer ran smoothly, my emails sent with all attachments intact. The world returned to its normal, explicable state. Almost. The temperature in my office never recovered. Even now, weeks later, it sits 2 degrees colder than anywhere else in the building. I've had maintenance check the heating vents 3 times. They find nothing wrong. The thermostat insists everything is fine. But I sit here in my coat and gloves, watching the shadows of gravestones creep across my floor, and I know better. I know something happened in that hallway. Something saw me, or I saw it. And that exchange, that moment of mutual recognition, created a debt I'm still paying. The worst part isn't the cold. It's the feeling that comes with it, especially in the late afternoons when the building is quiet and the light is failing. The sensation of being watched, not malevolently, but with intense curiosity, the way a child might study an insect under glass. The certainty that if I turned around fast enough, I'd see something standing behind me. Something that has learned the exact rhythm of my breathing, the precise temperature of my skin. I've started noticing other things. The way sounds seem to bend around my office door, arriving delayed or not at all. How my shadow sometimes falls at the wrong angle, stretching toward the cemetery when the light source is behind me. The dreams, if they are dreams, where I wake to find myself standing in the hallway again, always in the same spot, always facing that emergency exit, frost forming on the metal push bar. My colleagues have started to notice. They comment on how pale I look, how distracted I've become. One of them, I won't say who because I'm trying to hold on to the details that prove I'm still myself, still grounded in the real world, suggested I might want to take some time off. Get some rest. See someone. But what would I tell them? That I saw mist in a hallway and now reality feels negotiable? That I spoke an apology to empty air and something listened? That my office is exactly 2 degrees colder than it should be, and I can feel that differential like a hand pressed against my spine? They'd think I was losing it. Some days I think I'm losing it. Other days, I wonder if losing it is just the mind's way of refusing to accept what it cannot explain. If sanity is simply the comfortable delusion that the world follows rules we understand, and once you've seen those rules suspended, once you've watched mist take shape and felt the weight of something's attention settle on you like snow, you can never quite believe in the delusion again. I've researched the building's history, though I'm not sure what I'm looking for. The Thaddeus building was constructed in 1847, yes, but the land has a longer story. Before the building, there was a boarding house that burned in 1843, killing no one but leaving the owner, a man named Ephraim Thaddeus, with debts he couldn't pay. Before the boarding house, the lot stood empty for decades, considered unlucky by the locals for reasons the records don't specify. The cemetery next door is even older. St. Erasmus was established officially in 1823, but the earliest legible headstone dates to 1819, and ground-penetrating radar has revealed anomalies suggesting burials that predate any written record. The Historical Society's files mention complications with the original cemetery construction, bodies that wouldn't stay where they were put, graves that seemed to multiply overnight, workers who refused to continue their jobs without explanation. None of this proves anything. Old buildings and old cemeteries accumulate strange stories the way they accumulate dust. It's expected, even charming, in a city like Providence where Lovecraft once walked the same streets. But knowing the stories doesn't make the cold less real, doesn't make the watching feeling fade. Yesterday I worked until 8. The building was empty, the streets outside quiet except for the occasional car passing on Benefit Street. I'd almost finished a complex filing, the kind of detailed work that requires complete focus, when my computer screen flickered. Just once, but in that flicker, I saw something reflected that wasn't in the room with me. A figure, standing just behind my chair. Indistinct, more suggestion than form, but unmistakably there in that fraction of a second before the screen stabilized. I didn't turn around. I've learned that much. Looking directly at it, at them, at whatever this is, only makes it worse. Acknowledging it gives it substance, reality, power. So I sat very still, staring at my screen, watching the cursor blink, counting my heartbeats until the presence behind me faded back into the general coldness of the room. When I finally did turn, there was nothing. Of course there was nothing. Just my office, my desk, my coat hanging on the back of the door. Everything exactly as it should be. Except for the frost. A thin layer of ice had formed on the window, the one that looks out at ankle level onto the cemetery fence. In the frost, before it began to melt in the room's inadequate heat, I could see patterns. Not random crystalline structures, but deliberate shapes. Letters, maybe, or symbols I didn't recognize. They lasted perhaps 10 seconds before dissolving, leaving only water streaks on the glass. I took a photo, but it didn't capture anything useful. Just a blurry window with some moisture on it. The kind of image that would make someone suggest I need sleep, or therapy, or both. Maybe they'd be right. Maybe this is all stress, isolation, the particular kind of madness that comes from spending too many hours alone in a basement office next to a cemetery in a city known for its ghosts. Maybe I imagined the mist, and everything since has been my mind trying to create patterns from random events, meaning from meaningless coincidence. Maybe. But then evening comes, and the temperature drops those exact 2 degrees, and I feel that attention settle on me like a physical weight, and I know that something is sharing this space with me. Something that exists in the corners of perception, in the gaps between what I expect to see and what's actually there. I've stopped trying to give it back. Whatever I saw, whatever compact I made by seeing it and speaking to it, seems permanent now. The borrowed hours, if that's what they were, have been repaid, but the debt remains. Or perhaps the debt was never about time at all. Perhaps what I owe is simpler and more terrible. Attention. Acknowledgement. The constant awareness that I am not alone, have never been alone, will never be alone again in this cold room beneath the earth. Tonight, as I write this, I can feel it behind me. Not close, but present. Waiting with the patience of something that has already waited far longer than I can imagine. The fluorescent lights hum their bone-deep frequency. Outside my window, the shadows of gravestones stretch across the floor. And somewhere in the building, in the walls, in the foundation, in the air itself, something shifts. Something settles. Something that might be satisfied, or might be only beginning. I don't know which possibility frightens me more. What I do know is this. Tomorrow I'll come back. I'll sit at this desk, in this cold room, and I'll work. I'll feel the watching presence, see the impossible reflections, notice the small distortions that prove reality is thinner here than it should be. And I'll stay anyway, because leaving feels like abandonment, like breaking an agreement I never consciously made, but am bound to nevertheless. Or maybe I'll stay because some part of me wants to see it again, wants to understand what I glimpsed in that hallway, what shape the mist was trying to form, wants to know if it's reaching for me or trying to warn me, if it's malevolent or simply lost, if it exists in this world, or if I've begun to exist partially in its. The cold doesn't bother me as much anymore. I'm getting used to it, the way you get used to any constant condition. My body has adjusted, found new equilibrium. Sometimes I wonder if that's the point, if the cold is teaching me to exist at a different temperature, preparing me for some transition I don't yet understand. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still the same person who saw the mist in the hallway, or if I've been gradually replaced by something that only remembers being him. Sometimes I wonder if there's a difference. The fluorescent lights hum. The shadows stretch. The temperature holds steady at 2 degrees too cold. And I sit here, typing, while something watches from just beyond the edge of vision. Patient as stone, cold as earth. waiting for something I cannot name and would not recognize if I could. Still waiting, still watching, still here. Story 13. The house remembered me better than I remembered it. That's what I told myself the first week back in Tulsa, when the floorboards creaked in patterns I'd forgotten but somehow anticipated, when my hand found light switches in the dark without fumbling. Muscle memory, I said. The body keeps score. But there was something else too. A weight in the air, thick as August humidity, that settled over my shoulders the moment I crossed the threshold with my last box of belongings. The house wasn't just familiar, it was expectant. I'd moved back after the dissolution. That's the word Dr. Ramirez used during our final session in Portland, when I told her I was leaving. Not divorce, not separation, dissolution. Like I was a tablet fizzing apart in water. Maybe that's what happened. Maybe that's why I couldn't sleep in the apartment anymore. Why every shadow looked like accusation. Why I needed to return to something solid and known. To the two-story Craftsman on Maple Street where I'd grown up, where the walls were thick and the basement still smelled like my father's tobacco, even though he'd been gone 8 years. The first night, I slept like the dead, dreamless, complete. I woke to sunlight streaming through the same window I'd stared out as a teenager, and for 3 heartbeats I was 17 again, whole and unbroken. The second night, she said goodnight. I surfaced from sleep like a diver with failing oxygen, that desperate clawing back to consciousness. The bedroom was dark. I'd forgotten to leave the hallway light on. And in that darkness, close enough that I felt the whisper of breath against my ear, a woman's voice spoke. Good night. Not a question, not a greeting, a statement, firm and maternal, with the kind of authority that expected acknowledgement. The voice came from my left side, from the space between my pillow and the wall, where the plaster was cooled to the touch and marked with a water stain that looked like a bird in flight. I lay frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs. The rational part of my brain, the part that had sat through 8 months of therapy, that knew the architecture of anxiety and the physics of night terrors, started cataloging explanations. A dream, the house settling, a neighbor's television, the hum of blood in my own ears, transformed by my exhausted mind into something coherent. But I knew what I'd heard. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The light clicked on, harsh and yellow, revealing exactly what I expected. Nothing. The room was empty, just my unpacked boxes stacked against the far wall, the old dresser that had been here since childhood, the closet door half open the way I'd left it. The water stain on the wall remained a water stain. I checked the clock. 3:17 a.m. The hour when the body's temperature drops to its lowest, when hospital patients are most likely to slip away. I'd read that somewhere. Probably one of those anxiety spiral nights scrolling through articles I shouldn't have been reading. Sleep didn't return. I lay there until dawn, watching the darkness thin to gray, then to the pale gold of morning. When I finally got up, my neck ached from the tension of staying perfectly still for hours, as if movement might summon the voice back. I spent the day trying to forget. I unpacked boxes, installed shelves, drove to the hardware store for paint supplies. But beneath every mundane task ran a current of unease. The house felt different now, more aware. I found myself avoiding my bedroom, finding excuses to stay downstairs until exhaustion drove me up the creaking staircase. The third night, she came again. Same time. I'd left my phone on the nightstand and saw the screen read 3:17 when my eyes snapped open. Same place, that space by the wall that seemed to hold more shadow than it should. Same voice, closer this time, intimate as a lover's whisper. Good night. This time I didn't freeze. I rolled over, away from the wall, my breath coming fast and shallow. The room was silent except for the tick of the radiator and the distant hum of a car passing on Maple Street. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the room in a desperate arc. The beam caught dust motes floating in the air, the familiar shapes of furniture, the empty corners. Nothing. But I could still feel it. The residue of a presence, like the warmth that lingers after someone leaves a room. The air tasted metallic, the way it does before a storm. I didn't sleep again that night either. The fourth night, I was ready. Or I thought I was. I'd left every light in the house on, created a blazing fortress against the darkness. I'd taken melatonin, done breathing exercises, positioned my phone within reach with the emergency services screen pulled up. Ridiculous, I knew. What would I tell them? That a voice was being polite to me? But preparation proved meaningless. At 3:17, the bedside lamp flickered once, twice. Then the voice came, and this time it was different. It laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not mocking. Just two syllables of sound, brief and matter-of-fact, like someone acknowledging a private joke. The laugh of recognition. And with it, the wall lamp pulsed with light, casting the room into stuttering visibility. Dark, bright, dark, bright. Like an old film reel catching. In that stuttering light, I saw the water stain move. Just a fraction. Just enough that the bird shape seemed to tilt its head. And that's when the strange thing happened, the thing I still can't explain to myself. Instead of terror, I felt something else entirely. Pity. A deep, aching sadness that rose in my chest like water, unexpected and overwhelming. Because in that laugh, in that brief sound, I heard loneliness. I heard the exhaustion of trying. I heard need. Good night, I whispered back to the empty room, to the wall, to whatever was or wasn't there. The lamp stopped flickering. The darkness settled back, solid and complete. And I slept. After that, the voice stopped coming. But the lamp, a small brass reading light I'd plugged into the wall outlet near my bed, began turning itself off every night at 3:17. Not flickering, not dying, just clicking off with the same sound it made when I used the switch, then clicking back on exactly 1 minute later. I told myself it was electrical. Old wiring, faulty circuits. Houses this old had all kinds of quirks, but I knew better. I knew it was an answer, an acknowledgement of my acknowledgement. The nights took on a new rhythm. I'd lie awake, waiting for 3:17, watching the clock on my phone count down. When the lamp clicked off, I'd say goodnight into the darkness. When it clicked back on, I'd close my eyes and sleep would come, easier than it had in months, better than the medication Dr. Ramirez had prescribed, better than the white noise machine and the meditation apps and all the careful architecture of coping I'd built in Portland. I started to look forward to it, to that moment of communion with whatever shared this house with me. Sometimes I'd talk more, speak into the darkness about my day, about the dissolution that had brought me here, about the ways I was trying to put myself back together. I never heard the voice again, but the lamp always answered. Click. Off, then on. My brother called one evening in late September. He'd heard I was back, wanted to know how I was settling in. I almost told him. Almost described the voice, the laugh, the nightly ritual that had become as natural as breathing. But the words wouldn't come. How do you explain that you're having a relationship with your bedroom wall? That you're sleeping better than you have in years because something impossible is listening? Instead, I told him the house was good, that being home helped, which was true in its way. But things began to shift in October. The lamp started staying off for longer periods. 2 minutes, 5. Once, for almost 15 minutes, leaving me in darkness that felt different from ordinary dark. Heavier, more attentive. I found myself talking more during those stretches, filling the silence with whatever thoughts came to mind, trying to keep the connection alive. The water stain grew larger, or I thought it did. I'd lie there studying it in the lamplight, trying to remember if it had always reached that far across the plaster, if the bird shape had always had such detail. Sometimes it seemed like the stain was spreading, a slow leak from somewhere inside the wall. Other times it looked exactly as it always had, and I'd wonder if I was losing my grip on what was real. I started taking pictures of it with my phone, trying to document the changes. But the photos never showed what I saw with my naked eye. In the camera's lens, it was just a stain. Static, unchanging, which should have been reassuring but somehow wasn't. The house began to sound different too. The creaks and groans that had seemed familiar now felt like communication, a language I was on the verge of understanding. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when I was alone, soft and measured, pacing back and forth. I'd hear what sounded like humming coming from the walls, low and tuneless. Once I came home to find every door in the house open. Bedroom, bathroom, closets, cabinets, standing wide like mouths. I closed them all and said goodnight to the empty house. That evening, I sat on my bed and stared at the wall, at the stain that might or might not be growing. The rational explanations I'd stacked up so carefully were crumbling. This wasn't anxiety. This wasn't grief. This was something else, something that defied the frameworks I'd built to make sense of the world. At 3:17, the lamp clicked off. I waited for it to come back on. Waited in the darkness that pressed against my skin like something physical, like something with weight and intention. 1 minute passed. 2. 5. Please, I said to the wall, to the darkness, to whatever was listening. My voice sounded small and strange. The lamp stayed off. I reached for my phone, desperate for light, for proof that I was still in the normal world where electricity followed rules and walls were just walls. But my hand stopped halfway, because I heard it again, for the first time in weeks. Good night. But the voice wasn't coming from the wall anymore. It was coming from behind me, from the doorway, from the hall, from inside the house. I turned, slowly, my heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The doorway was empty, just a rectangle of darkness leading to the unlit hallway. But I could feel it now, that presence I'd been acknowledging for weeks. Feel it moving through the house like water finding new channels, spreading. The lamp clicked back on, but the light seemed dimmer than before, struggling against shadows that had grown teeth. I understood then, with the clarity that comes too late, what I'd done, what I'd invited in with my loneliness and my pity, and my desperate need for connection. I'd given it permission. I'd given it acknowledgement. And now, it didn't need to stay by the wall anymore. The water stain had spread across the entire surface now, I was sure of it. In the uncertain light, it looked less like a bird and more like a hand, fingers spread wide, reaching. I should have been terrified, should have run. But that same strange pity welled up again, mixed now with something darker. Recognition, maybe, because whatever this was, ghost, delusion, manifestation of my fractured mind, it was lonely too, just like me. Maybe that's why it had chosen this house, this room. Maybe that's why it waited until I came back. Or maybe I'd brought it with me. The lamp flickered again, and in the stuttering light I thought I saw something move in the periphery of my vision. A shape in the corner, a presence by the door, the suggestion of a figure that disappeared when I looked directly at it. Good night, I said again, because what else was there to say? Because the ritual was all I had left. This time, there was no answer. Just the sound of the house settling around me, its bones creaking, its breath moving through the vents. Just the darkness pressing closer, patient and hungry and home. The lamp clicked off one final time. And this time, I knew with terrible certainty, it wouldn't come back on until I figured out what it wanted. Until I understood that the dissolution hadn't ended in Portland. It had followed me here, to the house that remembered me, to the walls that listened, to the space between sleep and waking where the voice still whispered, where the stain still spread, where goodnight was never just goodnight, but a question I was only beginning to understand. I lie here now, in the darkness, and I wait. The clock reads 3:17, always 3:17, and I can't remember if minutes are passing or if time itself has dissolved into this moment, this breath, this terrible understanding that I might never leave this room again. Not because I can't, because I don't want to, because the voice is back, and it's calling from inside the walls. And this time when it says goodnight, I know, with a certainty that lives in my bones, that it means forever. And the worst part, The part that keeps me frozen here in the dark. I'm already answering back. Story 14. The phone call came at 11:30 on a Thursday night. The kind that arrives with the weight of inevitability, as if the universe had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I sat in my apartment listening to my uncle's voice crack and reform, delivering news that shouldn't have surprised anyone but somehow did. The fluorescent kitchen light hummed above me, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional white that makes the world feel temporary. I don't remember deciding to drive. The decision seemed to make itself, my hands already reaching for keys, my feet already moving toward the door. Birmingham was 3 hours away, and my cousin had said to come if I needed to. His voice carrying that peculiar gentleness people adopt when they're trying to hold someone else together while barely managing themselves. The highway unspooled before me in the darkness, reflective lane markers ticking past like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't name. His apartment sat on the second floor of a converted factory building, all exposed brick and oversized windows that probably looked artistic in daylight but seemed cavernous and watchful at 2 in the morning. He opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been standing there waiting, and pulled me into an embrace that lasted just long enough to feel like a transfer of some kind. When we separated, I noticed the shadows under his eyes had taken on a bruised quality, purple-black against pale skin. The living room smelled of old coffee and something else, something faintly floral that didn't match the sparse masculine furniture. He gestured toward the couch, a worn leather thing that had probably been expensive once, and disappeared into the kitchen to make tea neither of us would drink. I sat and felt the day's weight settle into my spine, that particular ache that comes from holding tension in places you didn't know could tense. The building creaked around us, old bones adjusting to the night. We talked for a while in the way people do when the real conversation is happening underneath the words, in the pauses and sighs, and the way eyes drift toward windows that show nothing but darkness. Eventually he said I should sleep, that the guest room was full of boxes but the couch pulled out, and I nodded because my body had already made that decision too. He brought blankets that smelled of cedar and retreated to his bedroom, closing the door with a soft click that sounded final. Sleep came in fragments, stitched together with the ambient noise of an unfamiliar place. Steam pipes knocked behind walls. Someone in another unit played music so quietly, it was more vibration than sound. I drifted in and out of consciousness, never quite reaching the depths where dreams solidify, caught instead in that liminal space where thoughts blur into half-formed images that scatter when examined. Morning arrived gradually, gray light seeping through the tall windows like water through cracked concrete. I woke to find my cousin already up, standing in the kitchen with a coffee mug held between both hands as if warming them, though the apartment was stifling. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite parse, something between concern and confusion, and that's when he mentioned it. His voice came out uncertain, the words feeling their way forward. He'd had a dream, he said, though he wasn't sure dream was the right word because it hadn't felt like dreaming, more like someone had been standing beside his bed talking to him in the dark. A woman in a dress covered with flowers, the old-fashioned kind with the full skirt and the pattern so busy it hurt to look at. She'd been complaining, he said, but not the way people usually complain. More like reporting a fact, the way you might mention the weather. Something about an old discomfort, something she'd been carrying for a long time. And then she'd asked him to pass along a message. He stopped there, coffee mug still suspended in both hands, looking at me with eyes that asked a question he couldn't voice. The morning light had turned everything in the apartment gray and washed out, objects losing their solidity in the flat illumination. I waited for him to continue, but he just shook his head, setting down the mug with a click that seemed too loud in the quiet. The thing was, he said finally, the woman had been very specific. She wanted someone to know that now it was light, that she didn't have to carry it anymore, that it had been passed on and she was grateful. His eyes never left mine as he spoke, searching for something, maybe recognition, maybe reassurance that he wasn't losing his grip on reality. We didn't discuss it further. The conversation died in the air between us, both of us suddenly very interested in our respective coffee mugs, in the view from the window, in anything except what had just been said. The apartment felt smaller somehow, the walls closer than they had been the night before. I excused myself to shower, needing the noise of running water to drown out the questions forming in my mind. The bathroom mirror was old, silvering at the edges, giving my reflection a ghostly quality that made me look away. Steam filled the small space, condensation forming on every surface, and I stood under water hot enough to hurt, trying to wash away the residue of the night. But something felt different. My lower back, which had been knotted tight with stress for weeks, maybe months, felt oddly loose. The constant low-grade ache I'd grown so accustomed to that I'd stopped noticing it consciously had simply evaporated. I twisted, testing the range of motion, expecting the familiar catch and pull. Nothing, just smooth, painless movement. I told myself it was the shower, the heat, the unconscious relaxation of sleep, but the explanation felt thin even as I constructed it. The steam continued to rise around me, obscuring the mirror completely, and for just a moment I had the unsettling sensation that something was standing just outside the shower curtain, patient and still. We spent the afternoon making the necessary calls, dealing with the bureaucratic machinery that activates when someone dies. My cousin handled most of it, his voice steady and professional, while I sat at the kitchen table sorting through papers that all seemed to say the same thing in different fonts. The floral smell I'd noticed the night before seemed stronger now, sweet and cloying, though I couldn't identify a source. No flowers sat on any surface, no air freshener plugged into any outlet. Just that pervasive scent, like walking past a florist shop on a humid day. Around 3 o'clock, I needed air. My cousin nodded when I said I was going for a walk, barely looking up from the documents spread before him. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the physical exertion, and stepped out into Birmingham's late afternoon. The city sprawled around me, industrial and stolid, buildings made of brick and purpose. I walked without direction, letting my feet choose the path, watching people go about their lives with the kind of focused intention that comes from having somewhere to be. That's when I felt it. A lifting. A lightening. As if something I'd been carrying without knowing it had simply detached and fallen away. My shoulders, which had been hunched forward for so long I'd forgotten any other posture, rolled back naturally. The tightness in my jaw released. Even my breathing felt easier, deeper, air flowing into parts of my lungs that seemed to have been closed off. I stopped walking, standing on a corner while people flowed around me like water around a stone. My hands weren't shaking. My chest wasn't tight. The low-level anxiety that had been my constant companion, that background hum of dread I'd learned to live with, had gone silent. The relief was so profound it was almost painful. The sudden absence of something so familiar, it had become part of my identity. But underneath the relief, something else stirred. A discomfort with the relief itself. Because burdens don't just disappear. Weight doesn't evaporate. It goes somewhere. It transfers. I walked back to the apartment slowly, testing each step, waiting for the old sensations to return. They didn't. The building loomed above me, all those windows reflecting the late afternoon sun like dozens of watching eyes. Inside, the elevator hummed and groaned, carrying me upward with mechanical indifference. My cousin was still at the table, but the papers had been pushed aside. He sat very still, staring at nothing in particular, and didn't respond when I came in. The apartment had grown darker, shadows pooling in corners despite the remaining daylight. The floral scent had intensified, almost overwhelming now, and I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. That's when I heard it. Music, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere in the apartment. Big band music, the kind with crooning vocals and orchestral swells, the sound tinny and distant like it was traveling through time as well as space. My cousin's head snapped up, his eyes wide and too bright. "The kitchen," he said. "The radio." We hadn't turned on any radio. Neither of us had been in the kitchen for hours. We moved together, drawn by the music, and found it sitting on the counter where it had presumably always been, a vintage tabletop model in cream-colored plastic. The dial glowed amber, tuned to a station I'd never heard of, playing songs from another era entirely. Standards from the 50s, the announcer said in a voice like warm honey, for those special moments when everything was just right. My cousin reached to turn it off, but I caught his wrist. We stood there listening as song after song played, each one smooth and nostalgic, each one carrying the particular emotional weight of music from a time before we were born. The singer's voice wrapped around lyrics about moonlight and dancing, and the way love feels when you're young, and the future seems infinite. "This is what was always on," my cousin said quietly, when they were all together, when everything was before, when she was well. He didn't need to specify who she was, the woman from his dream, the one in the flowered dress, the one who'd been carrying something heavy for far too long. We stood in the kitchen as evening deepened into night, the radio playing on, and I felt the wrongness of my own well-being like a stone in my chest. My back didn't hurt. My shoulders felt light. The anxiety had fled. But where had it gone? What had I accepted without knowing I was accepting it? What transaction had occurred while I slept on that leather couch, while my cousin dreamed of a woman who wanted to pass along a message? The song changed to something slower, more melancholy. The singer crooned about carrying torches and bearing burdens and the things we do for the ones we love. My cousin's breathing had gone shallow beside me, his eyes fixed on the glowing dial as if it might reveal something if he stared hard enough. I should have felt grateful. I should have felt blessed by whatever strange mercy had lifted my pain. Instead, I felt complicit in something I couldn't name, participant in a transfer I hadn't agreed to, recipient of a gift that was simultaneously grace and curse. The radio played on through dinner we didn't eat, through evening light fading to full darkness, through the long hours when night settles in and makes everything seem both more and less real. We sat in the living room, not speaking, listening to voices from decades past singing about love and loss and the bittersweet passage of time. The floral scent ebbed and flowed like breathing. Around midnight, my cousin finally spoke. His voice came out hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in days rather than hours. He asked if I believed in hauntings, in the persistence of the dead, in the way grief might take on weight and substance and pass from person to person like an inheritance no one wanted, but everyone eventually received. I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. Because my back still didn't hurt, and my shoulders still felt light, and the anxiety that had lived in my chest for years had vanished so completely it might never have existed at all. Because the radio was still playing, even though no one had touched it in hours. Because somewhere in this city, in some space between sleeping and waking, my cousin had been visited by a woman in a flowered dress who needed someone to know she was finally free of her burden. The song playing now was one I recognized, though I couldn't remember where I'd heard it before. Something about gardens and flowers and the way beauty persists even when everything else fades. The singer's voice wrapped around the words with a tenderness that felt like mourning, like celebration, like both at once. I looked at my cousin and saw my own questions reflected in his eyes. What had we inherited? What had we agreed to without knowing? What weight now rested on shoulders that moments ago had been light? What discomfort had found a new home in spines that had briefly known relief? The radio played on. The night deepened. And somewhere in the space between us, in the air thick with the scent of flowers that weren't there, something settled in to stay, patient and permanent as stone. In the morning, I would drive back to my apartment, back to my life, back to everything that waited for me. But I knew, with a certainty that lived deeper than thought, that I wouldn't be driving back alone. That whatever had been passed from the woman in the flowered dress to my cousin, and from my cousin to me, was mine now to carry, however long that might be, however far it might travel. The music swelled, horns and strings weaving together in complicated harmonies, and I understood finally what the woman had meant when she said it was light now. Not that it was gone, not that it had disappeared, just that she didn't have to hold it anymore. Because now we did. The radio played on and we listened, and the weight of flowers pressed down soft and heavy and inevitable, settling into our bones like it had always been there, like it would always be there, like there had never been any other way for this to end.